Hey everyone, welcome to our final live stream of 2023. I was just noticing before we went live that the countdown wasn't showing the little colorful circle thingy. I don't know what happened to it. I was looking for it just now, but I couldn't find it. So I'll make sure it's there next time. Let's see. We are waiting for Eric to join us for this. This will be episode 422, season 18, episode 2. Season 18, episode 2. Oh, and important announcement. If you're watching this, you already know. But important announcement. We have a new start time for the live stream. Yes, we are going to be starting at, where are we? Here we are. We're going to be starting at 1 p.m. Central Time now on the 2nd and 4th Friday of each month. Except for this month. Well, clearly this is not the 4th Friday, right? This is the... What is today? Last week would have been the 4th Friday, but that was also a holiday weekend. And both Eric and I had lots of stuff that was going on. Oop, I should be recording. Eric and I both had lots of stuff that was going on. And we just couldn't make last week happen. So we're doing it this weekend. And while this is technically still a holiday weekend, it's not as big of a holiday weekend in some, or for some parts of the country and the world. No, that's not true, is it? It's bigger. It's bigger. It's a bigger holiday weekend around the world because everybody celebrates the new year. Everybody celebrates that countdown. Now, there are some folks who celebrate different New Year's at different times of the year. We have the Year of the Dragon coming up, which is quite cool. I don't know where I'm going with that. Oh, yes. So 2nd and 4th Friday of the month, and 1 p.m. 1 p.m. is our new start time. There'll also be a slight change to episode titles moving forward in the podcast feed. I don't know why I never did this before. I just happened to notice as I was looking through the feed, or looking at the feed this last week in my own podcatcher, that the episode number can't easily be seen, which is nuts. You need to know what episode number it is, especially. So the way the RSS feed works is to keep the load down on the For Mac Guys Only web server. It only puts out the most recent 25 episodes in the feed. Now, I could bump that up more, but the more you put on it, the more demand you put on the web server, the worse it is. So I try not to put every single episode in the feed, but I've always traditionally kind of put the most recent 25 in the feed. And that's what's there. Well, that's confusing. Some people think we've only had 25 episodes. So I thought, how can I rectify this? How can I make it more clear where we are in terms of episode numbers for Mac Guys Only? So I'm going to start putting the episode number in the title, as long as I remember. It's a habit. 421 episodes in, it's a habit to not put it in the title, but I'm going to start putting the episode number in the title, and I hope that makes it more clear for all of you. And I hope it makes it more clear for those who are, looking at the feed, new subscribers looking at the feed and saying, what the heck? Why are there only 25 episodes? I thought he was doing this for a while. Well, we have been doing it for a while. 18 years, in fact. But yes, we are going to start putting that episode number in the title to make that more clear. Let's see. What else? I have been very lax about getting chapter markers into the replays on YouTube. I'm sorry about that. That's my fault. It's very time consuming. And of course, as many of us do, we're hoping that all these amazing AI tools that are coming out can help make some of these things easier for us, but we're just not there yet. So it's all manually done. YouTube seems to completely ignore the fact that I check the little box that says insert automatic chapter markers. It must be the way the show flows. It just, their algorithms can't pick out where chapter markers should be. So it doesn't automatically put them in. So I manually put them in, which is not a hard process in and of itself. To put a chapter marker into YouTube, you simply have to put it into the description. You put the hour, minute, second that you want the chapter marker, and then the description for that chapter marker afterward. Excuse me. And then it shows up. It's just automatic that way. So to go through, I could be very broad with the chapter markers, or I could be very specific, or I could be somewhere in between. And I think I've always been somewhat in between, leaning toward more specific. And I simply have not gotten to the episodes to put those in. So I apologize. I would like to do that though. Hey, Brian, Happy New Year to you too. Good to see you in the chat there. It doesn't show anybody. Oh, you must have just left a chat in there. Nice to see you. Let's see what else is going on. I think that's about all I have that's going on for now. Eric is just joining us. Let's see.
Just doing it.
Boom. No, where are you? Why? Oh, I have to assign you. Boom.
Yes, you have to assign me.
Yes, I have to assign you. Now, let's see
now
here.
I can't hear you. Oh, you just... Okay, there you go.
I can
you hear me?
you. I can hear you.
Okay, I can hear you.
It must be those...
I can hear you as well.
Good. That's the important bit. Now you've cut out again. Telling you, it's those goofy doodle AirPods. Here, while you're working that out, I'm gonna zoom and pan you a little bit and get you more centered. Be silent. Now the question is, can you hear me? Oh dear, I'm going to have a little lovely beverage here while Eric figures out his microphone and sound issues. People. Brian, you can hear me, right? You're about 20 seconds behind. You can hear me? We just can't hear Eric? Oh, guest has muted themselves. Yeah, you've muted yourself, apparently. Do 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 do. I can't unmute you. I don't know what he's doing. He's working with cables. He's got headphones on. Now. Ah, see, Brian can hear me. It's you, Eric. This is all you. You know what I should do? What I should do is I should just do this. Whether I can hear him or not, I should just to throw him off. That would be mean, though. I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't end the year that way. He'll just hang up on me. Now he's left. He's left entirely. He's given up. He's thrown his hands up in exasperation, never to join us again. We'll just make Brian our co-host. Do 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 do. There's new. Well, I should let Eric say this. There's something new has happened on his end, and that may be throwing him for a bit of a tizzy here. Boom. Rejoining.
Rejoining. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
And I can hear you. That's even more importantly, I can hear you.
It's those goofy doodle AirPods. I'm telling you.
No, it just dropped out again. Actually, I used those just fine last time we did this, and I used them because everybody else was using them. So, like, anytime we had a guest down here, they were using them. So I thought, well, what the heck? I might as well use them too. And they worked just fine. I don't think the problem was the AirPods. Back when we were having all that trouble, it was something else. It wasn't the AirPods, but I'm doing it now. I'm not wearing the AirPods, so. Although your sound did cut out.
You're a bit out of sync, but that's all right.
Yeah, that happens to you from time to time too, and I just figure, well,
it's an audio show.
I figure it must all work itself out. Yeah, it's an audio show, and I figure it must all work out once you're playing back the recording.
Well, it does not. I mean, YouTube's going to show whatever YouTube shows, but it works out in the end as I record everything here on my mixer to my left. That's what ultimately becomes the audio show. So there you go. Now,
Yeah.
I started to
And like we've said before, I have a face for audio.
I started to
Yeah,
explain
go
that
ahead.
that there have been some slight changes on your end that may affect, this first recording. It's the first time we've recorded since those changes took effect, and I didn't say what they were.
Right.
Leave it up to you to mention if you want to, but there some pretty major changes on your part that may affect how you're all set up there.
Right, right. And that is, I moved from California and I'm now in Texas. And actually, more importantly, I'm in an Airbnb right now. So, because we're not actually in our house yet. And so I am like in an Airbnb, like out in the middle of nowhere. And there's deer here that we feed at least 3 times a day. They come up to our house. And my wife actually is she always makes it a point to feed them. So now where we had 1 or 2 when we first got here, now we have like 10. So and it'll probably
because you're
get even more.
feeding them.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
People continue to show up at McDonald's because they get fed when they go there. So
Exactly. That's exactly right. We are the local McDonald's for the deer here.
for the deer population.
And yeah, and not only is there more deer, but now there's fighting. There's enough corn for everybody. But yeah, it's kind of funny. I told her that too. I said, "You really can come from this by feeding the deer so much."
No.
But she said, "I know, but it's you still feel compelled to do it."
Yeah, sure, yeah. And then, of course, by feeding the deer, you're feeding the local wolf population and
Right.
or cougars or whatever you have in that area.
Yeah, there are cougars. Actually, my brother-in-law, who moved here, him and my sister moved here a year ago, or better. They actually have been putting food out for deer by their place because they live out in a more rural area, and he's taking a little walk through the kind of the woodsy area that's behind his house. Him and his daughter, and they spotted a mountain lion who was looking at them. So he's like, I'm worried that we're actually attracting the wrong kind of animal, but nothing happened. But thankfully, but
Yeah.
yeah,
The closest I've
That's
come
it.
to a mountain lion is not spotting one, but hearing it. As we were backpacking in New Mexico, we heard a mountain lion, and it was not far. We had closer encounters with bear and rattlesnakes than we did with that mountain lion, but we did hear it, and it was not far.
yeah.
So yeah,
Sometimes hearing it's almost worse.
yeah, because you don't know where the heck it is.
I know, and it may sound closer than it is, or my niece, who's a nurse, had part of her schooling. She had to go over to Africa and work over there for 6 months. And when they were sitting around in the campfire or whatever outside the clinic or whatever, she said they could hear the lions, out in the dark. And they said, yeah, sometimes you'll have one pass by not too far away. They said just be, just try to act normal, whatever. And
Yeah.
she said that was a little unnerving. She
Don't-
said it just,
Here's the best advice I have regarding that, Eric. Best advice. Don't act like food.
yeah, there you go.
That will
I
get you
think-
every time.
That'll get you every. I think that's probably something I would not. I probably would act like food no matter what. I probably just wouldn't know how not to act like food.
By the
Yeah.
way, if you missed it, you got a very nice Happy New Year from Brian in the chat room. Yes,
I did
he's
miss
with
it,
us
actually.
today. Yes, he's with us. So
Yeah. Well, Happy New Year to Brian.
yeah. All right. So, do you have any news you brought to the table?
No, not outside of the soapbox thing.
Oh
that
yeah, no,
we
we need the soapbox thing, but no actual news. I sent you a link to an article just
yes.
a few minutes ago, and it's just another one of
Right.
those. Oh my gosh, okay, I got to say something about this. Not that it's wrong so much, but it's just wrong, and I have to say something. But let's see, what else? What else? What else? And then, of course, our main topic. You've got a few of your favorites you brought to the table.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool. Well, let's see here. Should we break all records and actually start recording early?
Yeah. That sounds like a good idea, actually.
I mean, Airbnb, rented internet. We gotta
Right.
get recording while we have a good thing going here.
Right. Well, we actually still can. Yeah.
While we actually still
That's
can.
right.
Yes, exactly. So why don't we? I got I got this started here. I actually remembered to start recording, which is always the important thing. Okay.
Yeah.
And I did come up with a title for this one. All right, here we go. In three, two, one. It's for Mac Guys Only, episode number 422 for December 29th, 2023. Get your tweak on. Hey everyone, welcome back to For Mac Guys Only, the show for the Mac community, where we share our thoughts and opinions on current Mac news and events. And joining me to continue celebrating the holiday season and welcome us into the new year, it's Eric Erickson. Happy New Year, Eric. How are you?
Pretty good. How are you, Mike?
I am doing well. Looking forward to 2024. Lots of exciting things coming our way this upcoming year. Not the least of which is Vision Pro. Now, I don't
Yeah.
have any plans to purchase one myself, but I'm a little excited to learn more about this as it comes to us,
Yeah.
which they're now saying might be as early as February. Is that right? Is that what
Oh,
I'm hearing?
wow. Yeah, I didn't know that. I think I'd heard March or May. No, yeah. Oh, well, that's great.
It's a lot earlier than I thought it was going to be. So that's one
Yeah.
exciting new thing to look forward to. I have my own, you can see I'm wearing my Macstock hat. I have my own plans in order for Macstock 8, the 8th Macstock. Don't have any dates to announce
Yeah.
yet, but hoping to do that soon so that we can get a move on with that as well. Oh gosh, I have so much to do for Mac. I have to recruit presenters. We got to get a venue. We got to, well,
Oh,
we got to
yeah.
pick dates for one. That's number one. But
Yeah.
yeah,
That's the big
that
thing.
that should be happening this year too. So I'm kind of excited about that. And Happy New Year to those of you joining us in the chat room. Brian is in there today. Nice to see you, Brian. Happy New Year to you. And anyone else who's joining us in the chat room, we're keeping an eye on that. So if you have any questions or comments as we move along, just let us know, and we'll try to bring you into the show. Well, Eric, it's been a while since we've done this, but as this is the time of year when new Macs are gifted to others or appear in our hands as gifts to ourselves, well, I thought it might be fun to share some of our favorite tips for helping a new Mac work better for us. Now,
Yeah.
these are all things, these are tweaks that we make to the Mac so that things just work more smoothly. And more importantly, don't drive me crazy when I find something isn't just set right when I go to use it.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I know these tweaks aren't for everyone, and they are called preferences for a reason. Although, actually, I think they're called settings now. But you know what I mean.
Yeah,
These are
right.
tweaks and changes that I like to make to a fresh Mac before I can sit down and get to work. So I thought we could share what those tweaks are and why others might find them useful. Plus, since it's been a while, and as I hinted just a moment ago, I also want to cover where to find these tweaks under the new settings menu, because as I was going through these, almost nothing is where it was the last time that we talked about these. And that was,
Right.
by the way, that was 5 years ago. That was in December 2018 was the last time we did one of these.
Wow.
Nothing is where it was. A couple things maybe, but nothing is where it was when we last talked about this. And I know you've brought a few tweaks to the table as well as maybe a little, what did you call it, Eric? A tirade?
Tirade, soapbox, yeah, complaint, however you want to say that.
Well, you
And
said that might be related to this as well, and you wanted to talk about
Yeah.
it too.
Right, right. But yeah, and you're exactly right. The settings thing is I pretty much just always use the search function.
Right.
Actually, I use the search function on the settings in the iPhone and iPad as well. To me, that is like the single best thing. It's just I I'm not a big fan of the setting. I realize why they did it, and I know that they did that because, well, this is what is on the phone and on the
Yeah.
iPad. The thing is on, well, I guess you could probably say that with everything. There are some things that have come to the iPad, I think, from the phone, and we've talked about this before, where when you're constrained, when you don't have unlimited options on what you want to do, then you're forced to come up with something that's more efficient, that works better. And I think that's one of the reasons the Mac is so good and the Finder is so good. It's because it was created back in a day when, you know, just doing that was a big deal. And so they came up with a really good system that hasn't just changed a whole lot, you know, in the even though it's, you know, 30 some years afterwards or
System
more.
preferences,
And
you mean? Yeah.
well, system preferences and also just the Finder in itself. You know, it's just the original Mac, 128K Mac, you know, wasn't capable of multitasking and didn't have a lot of, you know, so I think, you know, the original Finder that they came up with, I think it's really stood the test of time because it's something that was really well thought out. And, you know, it's one of those things that probably looks obvious to us now, but, you know, it wasn't then. And I think the same thing with the phone. You know, there's certain things that they had to do to get around, you know, the lack of power, the resources, the battery, and all that stuff that, you know, the Mac doesn't have to deal with today, especially a desktop Mac. And so there's something that's always plugged in. And so I think you do come up with some good ideas. But anyway, the settings, I think the settings would have been better off staying the system preferences, in my opinion. But, you know, they didn't ask me.
Well, no, they didn't ask us. And, you know, it's interesting because as I was going through, like I said, nothing is where it was before. I did go through some of my notes from the past and said, oh, okay, that's something I'd still like to mention. That's a tweak I still like to make. And then when I looked at where in my notes I said it resided, it's not there. I mean, in fact, in many cases, it's buried a lot deeper than it's ever been in the past. So it makes it harder to find.
Yeah.
And one of the ones that I'll mention is the summarize tool. And I remember you and I traded
Yes.
texts about this not too long ago.
Yep.
And I said, oh, yeah, you just find it here and here. No, it's like buried so deep now. It's very hard to find. And interestingly, you can't search for it. You can't find it. You have to kind of
No.
know that overarching umbrella that it resides under before you can find it. So
Right.
I was
you have to have a friend that knows where it is.
you have to have
In my case, you.
a friend that knows where it is. Well, it took me a little searching
Yeah.
to find it, and it took me a little searching to find it again today.
Oh,
And we'll talk about all that in just a minute. There has been some news, and it's interesting that you bring up the Finder because one of the news items I'm actually not going to talk about. It was something I had set aside as a potential news story, is a new open source file manager that's been made available not only for Linux, not only for Windows, but for the Mac as well. It's a cross-platform file manager, and it looks kind of nice, but if I'm being honest, it looks more Finder-like than it looks Windows Explorer-like. And when I saw the screenshots, I thought, okay, well, that's nice. And it's cool that there's a new open source file manager, but it's not like you can replace the Finder on the Mac like you can replace Explorer on Windows. So
Right.
it just becomes yet another app to sit and run on top of what you're already running. So
Right.
I thought, I'm not going to mention it. But, you talked about the Finder and how Apple has somewhat perfected it so that it could stand the test of time. That when I saw this news story about a new file manager, I thought, well, that's really cool, but I, why?
Right.
Why would I do that?
Right.
Windows, yeah, I can absolutely
Yeah.
see potentially
See
wanting to
doing
run
that.
this. Linux,
Yep.
absolutely. There's tons of different
Right.
file managers for Linux.
Yeah.
But for anyone who's interested, who's listening to this, it's called Explorer,
Oh.
Xplorer, and it looks cool. And if you're looking for some new way to interact with the files on your Mac or Windows or Linux, you might want to give that one a try.
Yeah, that sounds interesting, actually.
Now, were there any news stories that you wanted to cover this week, Eric?
No, not not offhand. And I always see them when we're not doing that, and then doing this, and then of course, a week goes by or 2 weeks, and now I can't remember. So, yeah, nothing
Well,
I can think of.
of course, the big news story, and I don't really have any intention of discussing this unless you would like to, but the big news story of the past week has been that on again, off again, on again sale of the Apple Watch 9.
Oh yes,
But
yep.
I figure, all we could really do about that is pontificate a bit, and there's nothing we can do about it really.
Yeah, no, and actually, that was one news story I was going to mention, just because I, I think it's stupid, and I think that Apple should have just have paid them, settled with them, did whatever, because this, unlike a lot of these patent trolls, this is something that's legitimate. And what I don't want to see happen is them shut off the O2 sensor on my watch because they don't want to pay Massimo, and they don't really have another way, because Massimo says that it's a hardware change and not going to be fixed with software. So to me, it's like, if I don't know, it just seems like if things were better managed, and I'm sure it didn't help hurt their Christmas sales, but I think it's just one of those things where they should just get on with it and settle. That I think the CEO of Massimo said, yeah, they have no problem settling, and they would look forward to helping Apple do whatever, and I think that would just be great. Because as much as I like the O2 sensor on the watch, I think it could stand to be better. I don't know how the other ones are on the other exercise or the other watches, but it works, but you pretty much have to not move at all for like 15 seconds. I mean, you can't even hardly breathe. Otherwise, it's just, oh, I can't do it. And so where most of those pulse oxes, yes, you don't want to move around a lot, but you can still move some, and it's not going to mess up the reading. So,
Yeah,
but
and I'll be honest, I haven't been following the story that closely. So what I hear you saying is that the offer has been on the table. They've said,
yeah,
"Hey, this is how we can settle this," and
right,
Apple has just decided that they don't want to do that. Now,
right.
is there evidence of Apple actually using their technology, or is this an independently developed technology that just happens to fall under this previously issued patent?
Patent. I tend to think it's probably the former, because it sounds like Apple enlisted Massimo back in 2013 already to come up with something. And I don't know the whole story, and I haven't really, but if I've got it right, I think they poached a couple of their employees and then took some of their tech. So, and apparently they violate a couple different patents. So I don't think it's something that Apple unwittingly stumbled onto. It sounds like it's maybe something that they, you know, took, and maybe they thought, you know, this wouldn't be a violation or something. I don't know. I have no idea. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of what it sounds like. So yeah, I think yeah, I think it's one of those things where I think Apple they should just, you know, either come up with their own thing or settle. And I'm thinking it'll be pretty hard to come up with their own thing
Yeah.
to make it work.
And I understand that they're looking at a potential software solution, which is interesting. And you mentioned that.
Yeah.
It's a potential software solution, which to me kind of sounds like, well, let's just turn it off or not
Yeah.
use these features,
That,
which then hinders the functionality of you know, the reason many people have purchased a watch.
right. Exactly. That's, you know, that's my point. I don't want him sending out an update, and I'll be very careful to update my watch from this point so they can just shut it off. You know, to me, that's not a solution. You know, how about this? Give me my money back. You know, it's like if you're going to take away features on the watch because you violated somebody else's patent, then, you know, you take it a step further. You know, it's like, yeah, and it sounds like there's some international court ruled that they violated this patent, and they were, I think, hoping that the Biden administration would step in, and they haven't. So that's probably a good, clear indicator that, you know, it's, you know, that the Biden administration either agrees or something. So it doesn't sound like Apple's going to be able to get out of it too easy.
That is actually an interesting point you just raised. Apple could potentially be opening themselves up to even more trouble by way of a class action lawsuit. If they have to disable the sensor and they don't want to
Right.
pay licensing fees, yeah, give me my money back. You know,
Right.
I
Right.
paid good money for this watch, for this feature, and now you're telling me I can't have it?
I can't have it because you didn't, you know, acquire it legally or whatever. Yeah.
This is not a solution that they can solve by just saying you're holding it wrong or issuing new, you know, wraparound rubber
Right.
bumpers or
Right.
selling iPod socks or whatever. This is something that, you know, you're
Right.
if you're taking away that, and we don't know that that's where they're going, but if they take away
Right.
functionality, that opens up a whole nother can of worms that
Yep.
I'm not sure they want to open.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't think so. I forgot about that. You're holding it wrong.
And then what happens to all the watches that have been produced?
Yeah, that's just it.
You know, for a
You know?
company that claims to be leaps and bounds of over everyone else in terms of e-waste.
Yes.
Yeah,
Right.
talk about e-waste. They're gonna have to reissue them, disable the hardware, and reissue them as Apple Watch 9 Lite.
Yeah. Light. Right. Right. There was and the reason why I kind of am concerned about this is because there was some talk that with the AirPods first generation that they violated some noise canceling patent of Jabra, and that because it did seem like the noise canceling started out one way and then kind of went another way, that it wasn't as good as it was at the beginning. There was a lot of speculation on that, and I was kind of thought that myself, and then it came out that apparently Jabra sued them for violating a patent, and that was one of the reasons why it took like 3 years for them to come out with the second gen AirPods Pro that had, and the noise canceling was actually a lot better, but apparently it didn't violate. My guess is that it didn't violate these patents, so that's why I'm concerned that they might do something like that with the watch. You know, that they've already kind of set a precedence for it.
Yeah, they're going to have to do something along those lines, and as you said, it's,
Yeah.
if it limits that functionality, that's That's going to make for a lot. If you're buying into it and you know
Right.
this up front, that's one thing.
That's
But
one thing.
having bought into it and then have it be taken away, that's
Is another.
that's something entirely different. Well,
Yep.
you mentioned having a tirade. I guess we went on a little
Tirade, and
rat
that
hole
wasn't it.
there. That was not really a tirade. That was just a little
No.
diversion from the main topic
Yeah.
here. I have another diversion. We'll get to your tirade in a minute, but
No, that's no
I
problem.
like to rant about things myself, and I have one, and it comes back to the old 8 gigabytes of memory controversy.
Yep.
Last time it was courtesy of our friends PC Gamer. This time it's courtesy of our friends at Macworld. In an article published yesterday, just yesterday, December 28th, in their latest attempts to convince us, Apple, I don't know who they're trying to convince, that 8 gigabytes isn't enough, Macworld's executive editor wrote what I believe is, well, it's a slightly misleading opinion piece that is entitled, "If you got a new Mac for Christmas, you might want to switch it for something better."
Yeah.
And as everybody who reads that title thinks, what, Windows? What are you talking about?
I know.
Linux? What do you want us to
It's a
switch to
total
something
bait.
better? Well,
Right.
I say misleading, or I'll even say slightly misleading. I'll stick with slightly misleading. I don't want to say it was necessarily deliberate, but I say that because there are several opinion-filled leaps that are made in the article, including one in the third paragraph that reads, quote, "Even without knowing what Santa brought, I'm going to assume it has 8 gigabytes of memory, since the only new Macs that have 16 gigabytes of memory are the M2 Pro Mac Mini and the M3 Pro and the M3 Max MacBook Pros." End quote. Well, that's factually wrong, technically wrong. It's not wrong because
Right. Right.
maybe it's just sloppily written, because it should read that the only new Macs that ship with, by default, 16 gigabytes
Right.
of memory out of the box, not the only Macs that offer 16 gigabytes of memory. It doesn't say offer,
Right.
it says that have 16 gigabytes of memory. Well, that's very misleading. That's like saying the MacBook
It
Air
is.
doesn't have 16 gigabytes of memory. Of course you can get 16 gigabytes of memory on it.
Right.
Second, it assumes that the person buying the Mac, whether it's for yourself or as a gift, didn't do their research. Or,
Right.
I don't know, didn't ask the recipient what they want or what they need. I mean, if by some chance I had $1,200 lying around to give someone a Mac, I think I'd probably ask a little bit about their needs first.
Right. Yes.
Then it goes on to explain about the technical details of unified memory, that it can't be upgraded, et cetera, et cetera. Again, implying that you're a complete numbskull if you buy a Mac with 8 gigabytes of memory. Now, those are my words. Those are my words, not
Yes.
his. Those are
Right.
my words. But it does get interesting when he backs up his assertions and writes, quote, "I speak from experience, having gone from a 13-inch M1 MacBook Pro with 8 gigabytes of RAM to a 14-inch M1 Pro, M1, I copied and pasted this, so there's an error here. 14-inch M1 MacBook Pro with 16 gigabytes of RAM to a 14-inch M3 Max MacBook Pro with 36 gigabytes of RAM. And in each case, the reason why I upgraded was memory." Okay, cool. Claiming that it finally took that leap to 36 gigabytes of memory to resolve his memory problems, his proof of Mac slothiness comes in screenshots from Activity Monitor, which is cool. Finally, some concrete stuff that we can sink our teeth into.
Right.
But they're itty bitty tiny little blurry screenshots. So we can't really see what's going on there. But I did blow them up.
Right.
I did blow them up. And wait a minute, let's look and see what he's running. It turns out that he's not just, quote, browsing the web and watching videos, which he claims even that can't be handled by 8 gigabytes of memory, but let's look at those teeny tiny little screenshots that are so small and grainy that he's almost inviting us to ignore what he's actually running. And what do we see? Yes, we see Photoshop. And Photoshop in the screenshots is sucking up anywhere from 1 to 6 gigabytes of memory by itself. And we also see that pig of an email client, Outlook. Now, we also see Creative Cloud Helper, we see Word, we see Memory Hog Chrome, we see Safari with tons of tabs open, which is cool. Look, I have like 30 tabs open right now. And we see some other standard apps like TV, mail, music, and so on. But the main thing that we see is a pro-level app that's sucking up a ton of memory. No doubt because of the number of images or size of images that he's working on at any one time. Now, this isn't mentioned in the article. All he says is that 8 gigabytes wasn't enough to work on his Mac. But it's clear he wants us to focus on the memory pressure graphs that are in those screenshots. And yes, it looks bad. It looks horrible. But I wonder what it would look like without Photoshop running. Pro apps are that point at which we have both said, yep, you need a minimum of 16 gigabytes of memory. So, just for comparison, and admittedly to help prove his point a bit, let's check out the M1 MacBook Air that we have running here at home. This is an M1 MacBook Air that we purchased the year it was released. It has 8 gigabytes of memory. I did a lot of research on whether 8 gigabytes or 16 gigabytes was going to be enough. It felt very weird to me to buy a new laptop Mac with 8 gigabytes of memory. Frankly, it didn't feel right at all. And then everything I read, everything I saw, no doubt articles I saw on Macworld too, by the way, I'm sure I did, because if they do comparisons or whatnot, I'm sure I read those. Lots of YouTube videos. I came to the determination that 8 gigabytes of memory was probably enough, quite frankly. And truth be told, it's proved to be the case. On an M1 MacBook Air, 8 gigabytes of memory has proved to be more than enough. So just before recording, I ran upstairs and I grabbed it exactly as it was left by my wife, with all the apps running that she uses on a daily basis. And here's what she had. There's Google Chrome with a few tabs open. And Chrome, by the way, is not her primary browser. Her primary browser, Firefox, had 4 tabs open. Mailplane, which really is a browser in and of itself. It's a wrapper for gmail.com. It hasn't been updated in years. It's not going to be updated. It's an Intel app. So that means it's not optimized for Apple Silicon. And it depends upon Rosetta 2. So it is, coincidentally, the biggest memory hog on her Mac that's actively running. She has Microsoft Word and Excel with a couple docs open. Messages, text edit, stickies, Dropbox, 1Password. Cool. That may even be pretty typical for a daily driver Mac. There's no pro apps, or there aren't any pro apps as I would define them, but there's a good number of apps. She's got a lot of stuff open. And you know, I don't know how it is in your household, but my wife, she never quits apps. Never. I'll go up to her Mac and there's all these apps in her dock with dots under them. Dot, 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 dot. They're all running. They might not be active, but they're all running. They're all taking up memory. She just keeps them all running all the time.
What seems to be the thing in my house is that they don't quit them. They close the window.
Right.
And so the app is still running. Yeah. And it doesn't matter how many times I tell them, you could just quit the app. Yeah.
And that's fine. That's fine. My point is, it should be fine. If that's how the user uses the Mac, then that's how they should use the Mac. Right? And if using the Mac the way they want to results in subpar performance, then I'm 100% on board with this. But that's not the case here. Her memory usage is sitting at 6.8 to 6.9 gigabytes. As I had it up and running before we started recording, I was watching it. And it's sitting there between 6.8 and 6.9 gigabytes of memory used of the 8 gigabytes that she had. and 2.69 gigabytes of swap used. And again, we're not swapping to an ancient old, platter-filled hard drive here. We're
Right.
swapping to unified storage and memory because
Right.
swapping goes both ways. We're swapping to unified storage and memory in Apple Silicon, an M1 Mac.
Yeah.
And memory pressure, certainly not
Yeah.
in the red as the article suggests, but it's definitely yellow. But it was sitting at roughly 50% of the graph. It's got that little graph there. It shows memory pressure.
Okay.
And with
Yeah.
8 gigabytes of memory and all this stuff running, she was sitting at roughly 50% of the graph. And I'm fairly confident that if we shut down Mailplane, which also
That would go down.
it would go down tremendously because it's not optimized. It relies upon Rosetta. That's a lot of stuff going on in the background, utilizing the resources of this Mac. But the most important thing, even with memory pressure sitting at roughly 50% of that graph, in the yellow, admittedly, and again, this is to help prove his point in the article, there's no indication of any drag on the system. I could switch between apps, I could switch between tabs, I could open additional apps, and I had no waiting at all. I was just using it like a normal user, and there's no drag, no stuttering, no pausing. It was running great. In other words, the Mac seems to be handling things quite well. More importantly, I'm not getting any complaints from her that the Mac is slow or grinding to a halt. That's the most
Right.
important thing. So,
And you probably would if it was.
almost without a doubt. Yeah. And that,
Yeah.
again, not a criticism, but if, this is the Mac we purchased and this is the Mac I recommended, and if it's not performing as I suggested it would, I'm going to hear about it. So, while I definitely agree and appreciate that a Creative Cloud running Mac user would benefit from a memory upgrade, I feel like the article could benefit from a bit of transparency and just be upfront with folks by saying, yeah, look, I know, I run these high-end apps, and it was my mistake to think that I could get by with 8 gigabytes of memory on a MacBook Pro. But to bury that information in grainy screenshots and outright state, quote, your new Mac already needs more memory, and
Right.
that if you received a Mac for the holidays, that you should immediately return it for something else with more memory, isn't taking into account that most of Macworld's readers aren't him.
Yeah.
Now,
And
go ahead.
well, like you said too, and you said, I think he said in the article that it's not even enough memory for web browsing and watching a video and doing whatever. But it is, because like you were talking about with your wife's MacBook Air, people are doing that all the with their Macs, their MacBook Airs, and they're not running into trouble. I mean, I don't hear anybody complain, saying, you know what, I got this MacBook Air, I got this, and I just can't do anything with it.
I can't browse the web, gosh darn it. Yeah.
I know. I never hear that. I don't, and so that's just the thing. And like you said too, I think that assumes people, they're going to buy a Mac for somebody and they're not going to, like you said, ask them what they want or do any homework or just not even, make sure. I mean, no one would buy me a Mac because they know that I probably want something more than, but even like my mom got a new iMac and I helped her pick it out. And I had gotten her upgraded to 16 gigabytes of memory, and then also 512 gig of RAM or storage, excuse me. But just because that's kind of what she had before. She could probably get by with 256 and 8 gigabytes for that matter. But I just thought, just for going ahead into the future, it might be, a better thing. But, I'm also thinking that on an M3, I think it's supposed to handle memory better anyway. So I'm wondering, I'm not saying that you should just have 8 gigabytes and that's all you need and everything else. But I I don't know. I wonder if it's not as big of a deal. And believe me, Apple stuck in 16. That was the default, and went from there. But I wonder if it's sometimes much ado about nothing.
Look, I
I
am
don't know.
far from an Apple apologist. I'll
Yes, right,
we just mentioned the iPod socks and the you're holding it wrong and
right,
all this kind of stuff. I don't let
right.
go of that stuff, but I have to
No,
admit, I really was concerned about that being the default with these new computers until the computer itself, until the Mac proved me wrong. And it
yep,
did, and it has in spades. I felt very comfortable purchasing a Mac Mini with 16 gigabytes of memory to run Ecamm Live. And
yeah,
you know what? I don't regret it. I don't regret not spending that extra money. What I spent the extra money on was storage. What I did not spend the extra money on was more memory. And I'm glad I didn't. I don't need it.
right,
It's running fantastically. And quite frankly, it probably would still run fine on 8 gigabytes of memory.
right.
A lot of it does come down to how you use it. Now, I'm going to stick with what I said before. These new Apple Silicon Macs are amazing machines. And even the 8 gigabyte models are fantastic Macs for folks who are just looking for a Mac to get them through the day. But
Yeah, yeah,
if your needs skew toward the high end, and this is again where the article fell short, just like PC Gamer. If your needs skew, I think they might even be the same publisher now that I think about it. If your needs skew toward the high end and you routinely edit images, you edit video, you open large numbers of complicated image filled documents, you have a ginormous photo library, that will suck up memory on your Mac. If you have a
yep,
big photo library, go with more memory for sure. Or you
yep.
do other high end work that demands it, definitely spring for more memory at purchase time. When it comes down to it, only you know how you're going to be using that new Mac. And for goodness sakes, if someone is buying you a Mac, just like you said a moment ago, Eric, be sure to have that conversation first, especially, especially if you're going to spring for engraving.
Right, right. Yes,
Actually, does
yeah.
Apple still do that?
I
Do they
just don't
still,
get stuff
can you,
engraved.
can you still get engraving? I have literally engraved one thing in all the years I purchased from Apple, and that was an iPod.
Yeah, same with me actually.
I
I
don't know if they
don't
still do
know.
it.
I'm sure you can
Yeah.
on some things, but I don't know. Yeah, I that that is the big reason why I don't do it either. You can't return. I don't. I plus plus it's something if you really want to do it, you can probably do it afterwards. Take it in some place and do it somehow.
Yeah, sure.
But you're right. That's the only way I did it too is on an iPod.
Yeah. And in fact, the side note here, that iPod had a recall on it because of battery issues. And we never took part in the recall because it was engraved for a special occasion. And we decided to just drain the battery and not use it anymore.
And just deal with it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just deal with it.
that's cool.
Okay, Eric,
Yeah,
why don't we go ahead and get our tweak on? But
that sounds good.
I'm really curious. So I want to start with your soapbox. What's on your mind?
My soapbox. My soapbox. Well, this there's actually two things that kind of go with it, and they do go along with getting a new Mac, because it's part of something that either you if you get a new Mac and you run Migration Assistant, or yeah, that's probably the best example right there. And it was something that I kind of thought, well, actually, in both of these cases, I kind of thought, well, it's just maybe me. I hadn't heard anybody else complain about it, so I guess maybe it's, just my situation. And with one of them, I still haven't. But the other one, there was an article in Mac World, or maybe it was Six Colors. I'm trying to think, by Jason Snell. But anyway, and this has to go with, you get a new Mac, you run Migration Assistant, and now that everything runs over good, gets transferred, and now you're going to go in there and start setting things up the way you want to. And anyway, what I've run into is this, and this is where Jason Snell, I think, had what was the article called? Picture is worth 1,000 permission, something permissions, I think. And that's and don't get me wrong, with Apple security, and we talked about this a lot, for a long time, and I think we talked about it when the Mac App Store was making its debut, and we were all kind of wondering how they're going to handle all this stuff with sandboxing and everything. And I know one of the things for me especially was automation, because I liked AppleScript, I liked Automator, and I liked a lot of this, doing that stuff, and I was worried that they were going to sandbox things to death. And so I wouldn't be able to use apps that I really love, like Keyboard Maestro and Default Folder and Hazel, and just even AppleScript. So they've gotten around this by setting up this huge list of permissions that basically lives inside of the security and privacy. I was going to say preference pane, but I guess it's settings pane now. Yeah. And so when you run the transfer, the migration, and then you get everything over, and now you boot up the Mac, which you are presented with the second that it boots up is all of these, essentially permissions to ask, for each app that needs to have access to a certain thing. You get a new dialog box or alert box saying, you need to go make a trip to the settings, the privacy and security and privacy settings pane, and turn on this, to allow permissions, whether it's allow the app to the access to the desktop, to your calendar, to your documents folder, to your photos, to just accessibility, screen recording, just input monitoring, the whole 9 yards, any file and folder, the whole hard drive, and it's just nonstop there. I know I'm a person that has a lot of different apps, and I have a bunch of things, and this is why I think maybe people don't run into this a lot, but I have. And it just, there's something, and I'm not saying that Apple needs to become insecure. I'm just wondering if there could be a option for somebody like me, or maybe more of a power user. Maybe it lives in the terminal. Maybe it's, maybe it's something like sudo permissions default off equals yes, off. Yeah, exactly, off. Just, I don't care. Just because at a certain point you do get kind of permission fatigue, and you start yes, yeah. Yep. And now you're not really paying attention to what you're doing, and so so it was funny when I read his article, because I was laughing, and I should get a link to it, because I was like, yes, that is exactly the same thing that I have run into. So the second thing, the part of my tirade, and this is also with getting a new Mac, or at least with using a different app, and this one wasn't in there, but it's the app-specific password. And Apple, sometime back, probably about 5 years ago, switched to this app-specific password. And so for your iCloud account, if you use Mail, this won't, like if you use Gmail, it's not a big deal. But if you use, if you don't use Apple Mail, or Apple's calendar,
right,
calendaring apps or whatever, and you use something like Fantastical or BusyCal, or you use Spark or AirMail, something else, and you want to use your Apple ID or Apple email, and I've got 3 of them. So if you want to use those, you have to generate an app-specific password for each one of those emails. Let's say if you're using Spark, for each one, so you have to go into the website, the Apple ID link or URL, go in there and to generate app-specific password. So you have to log in with your username and password. Then when you go into app-specific password to generate a new password, you have to type in your password again, and then you have to go through that secondary auth, allow, where you have to type in the 6 digits, and then finally you get a password. And so you have to do for each email, for each app. And so you could be literally making 9 trips or more, especially in my case for this. And I'm not even really sure why. I thought, well, maybe if I change my password on my iCloud email, I won't have to change any of those. Those will just stay the same because they're specific to that app and whatever. No, that's not the case at all. If you change your password on your iCloud email or any Apple ID or iCloud email that you have to go and set up new app specific passwords for each one of those emails for each one of those apps that you use. It's just a nightmare. And the thing is, I think a lot of people don't run into it because they either use Mail or Calendar, or maybe they use Fantastical or BusyCal or something like that, but they use their Google accounts or Yahoo accounts or something like that. And so they don't actually run into it. And for the life of me, I'm not sure why Apple does this. I don't know what is secure about it, actually. I don't know. The only thing I can think of is that it keeps your actual password out of these third-party apps, but it doesn't seem to be. I don't know. It's
Okay. I will admit, I do not use my iCloud account,
right.
my iCloud mail account. I have one. I don't use it for anything except getting receipts from Apple when I buy something from the store. That's
Yeah.
about all I use it for. My renewals for iCloud or Apple TV or whatever. That's all that email account gets used for, and so I just use Apple Mail for it. So I don't.
Okay, that's what I was wondering because I know you use Thunderbird.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
my primary mail accounts are Google Workspace. I don't really have any Gmail accounts that are primary accounts, and the couple that I have are actually I still use MailPlane for them as well. Fortunately, to this day, even though they claim it may break at any moment, MailPlane still works, and I just love the functionality of it. I like that standalone kind of wrapper for gmail.com, and so for Gmail accounts specifically, I use MailPlane. For all my other accounts, I use Thunderbird. It's just the absolute most powerful, most versatile email client that I've come across, and
Since
I
Eudora.
since Eudora, and I do believe that Eudora, yeah, wow, there's a throwback for you.
That was a good
Actually,
email client, though.
it came out of Mozilla Mail. Remember when they had the Mozilla
Oh,
Suite?
did it?
You had the Mozilla web
Yeah.
browser,
Yep.
and as part of that, you had
Yep.
the calendar and the mail, and all. It was all kind of all in one suite, and they kind of broke it off. And when they broke it off into Firefox, well, then they're like, well, we don't have this suite anymore. So then they broke that mail component off into Thunderbird, and it kind of went from there. So you had the commercial
Oh, okay.
Mozilla suite, and then you had the open source Firefox and Thunderbird and Lightning for calendars and what have. That's a whole nother conversation. But yes, I really love Thunderbird. And when you add, so Google does the same thing, by the way. Google will also require you to create an app-specific password if the app that you are using does not support the more modern, more secure OAuth method of
Oh,
signing into your account.
so I can
And
see that.
Look, even Microsoft supports that. So if you go to add
Yeah.
a Google account to Thunderbird, for example, third-party mail client, you will have a small window pop up over Thunderbird as you add the account. That's effectively a little mini web browser, and it takes you to a
Right.
Google login screen. You sign in, you do your two-factor authentication, you allow access to the app by way of that. But this whole time you're using your normal Google Workspace or Gmail password. You're not creating an app-specific password. You're using your normal one because you're using this this OAuth method, and that's OAuth, the OAuth method of signing in securely into your account. You're not using IMAP or POP or whatever. You're actually using this
Right.
other method. So as long as the app that you're using has been brought up to speed and is conforming to the latest security standards for signing into, let's say, a Google account or a Microsoft account, then heck, possibly even Yahoo Now that I think about it, I don't know about Yahoo if they're using this method or not. But you don't have to use an app specific password. So what does that tell me? That tells me that Apple is not using the latest methods, latest recommended methods for signing securely into web-based
Right.
accounts.
Yeah.
Or are they? I mean, I don't know because I don't sign into
It-
calendaring or anything, and I never have a problem with
no,
Fantastical because my calendars are also through Google Workspace and what have you. So, what's
right.
the deal? Is Apple
They don't.
not
They
using
don't
this method?
use OAuth. No, I'm sure that they don't because you essentially go and get the app generated, the password generated for the app, and then you go and paste it into where you're, where essentially you're signing into your iCloud within that Mail or Spark or whatever, not Mail, but Spark, and it's pretty much right in that IMAP section. So it's not,
So it's IMAP.
it isn't a situation where where you're actually going out to the web browser. And which says to me again, too, why doesn't Apple do that? It's a better user experience, for a company that's about, it just works and it's whatever. Why put somebody through that? It's essentially, it's a pain for us to do it, but like for in the case of my wife or my mom or whoever, they just wouldn't do it. Well, they would just get me. And so, it'd just be, I think for a lot of people, it would be like, what is this? And some of these things, whether it's Spark or whatever app, they actually have like a set of instructions. Okay, here, go out and do this. They'll even have a link to it. And you're thinking, why should they have that? Why shouldn't Apple? It's almost like, what is Apple doing? Are they actually setting it up like, we don't really want you using this. We just want you using our mail or calendar. So we'll just make it kind of tough to do. And if you can get it, fine. If you can't,
I
we'll
think
just use
that's
our
it,
app.
quite frankly.
Yeah.
And I do want to clarify something I said. I wasn't being technical enough when I talked about OAuth. So OAuth is you are still setting it up as IMAP or SMTP. Let's be clear about that.
Right.
You're still setting it up
Yes.
that way. OAuth is the authentication method. It's the way
Yeah.
by which you prove to Google you are who you say you are. So
Right.
that's what I'm talking about when I say OAuth, and I guess technically it's probably even OAuth 2 by now. I mean, it's been a long time.
Yeah.
We're up on what I don't want to fire it up because we're live streaming, but I think we're up on version what 120 of Thunderbird now or something, and it was somewhere around the early version 90s of
Probably.
it that this change took place. And if you were using an older version, you had to use app specific passwords. But once they released the version of Thunderbird that allowed this new authentication method, then you could sign in that way. And pretty soon, Google started cutting off clients that would not conform to this OAuth authentication method. So, yeah, I'm
I
kind of
wonder.
surprised that Apple doesn't do that. But again, like you said, if you're going to set it up on a Mac or an iPhone or an iPad, you're probably going to just use Apple Mail or Calendar or what have you.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
I.
I have tried Spark Mail. It's too simple for me. It doesn't do
It's,
enough. I mean, it's
well,
great.
you know
People
what?
love that simplicity, but it's too simple for me. Bleh. Even Apple Mail's a little too simple.
Yeah. Have you used the latest Spark? I know. I know. I actually use Apple Mail now, especially on the Mac, and I use it with Mail Butler. Butler. I just decided to pay that because it's got a lot of extra features that they offer. So, but I like the way Spark. I don't like Spark on the Mac anymore, but the way that Spark on iOS, the way that it separates out kind of it's got like people notifications and then newsletters. So it's sort of like, and people are obviously, would be like you. somebody that is mailing directly to me and it's one person. Newsletters would be, Amazon deals, dealer. That notifications would be like your order is shipped, whatever, a little bit. So it kind of, and I kind of like how it kind of groups that stuff like that. So I can kind of see right away without even, let's say I didn't look at my email for a few days and you sent me something 4 days ago. You're right at the top because you're in the people and they don't have a ton of that, so because it puts that right, forward. I don't have to scroll through a whole bunch of email that's almost like spam. So that's one of the reasons why I do like Spark. But otherwise, yeah, you're right about the simplicity and stuff. I used to use Airmail, which had every feature known to mankind, and I really liked it, except for it was buggy. I finally just couldn't take it anymore. It was so funny because I saw reviews like that too, and for Airmail, and it was almost like they just said, I want to like it, but for years it was just like the bugs never got fixed. So I gave up on that, and then I went to something like Spark. But I should check out Thunderbird because I know I probably would like that a lot better. I was going to say, I think maybe I always said it doesn't support OAuth, but maybe they do, because when you have to go log in, you have to go to, appleid.com, apple.appleid.com or whatever, and log into there. And of course, you have to do your 2FA through that too. So that whole login process there probably is OAuth. And then you get a app specific password there, and then you take that back and paste it in. So it's probably, to get that, you did have to go through, my guess is you did have to go through an OAuth sort of thing.
Yeah, but your mail client is not, your mail client's not set up to use it as the authentication method.
Right, exactly. And it could, because they're doing it for Google and they're doing it for Yahoo possibly, but they don't do it for Apple because Apple does this other thing. And I wish they would just get rid of it. And then the other thing is too, heaven forbid after a few years, you end up generating all these app specific passwords. And then it says you've generated too many app specific passwords. You have to revoke some. And it's like, but it's really not app specific. It's like app device specific, because I can't seem to use, it's not like, okay, I've generated, for my iCloud account one, I've generated this specific password for Spark on my Mac. Now I'm going to put it in Spark for my phone or iPad. No, you have to do a new one. It's stupid. It's just really annoying.
Yes, I agree. It is very annoying. Two, if you're looking for a more Mac-like mail client that has the power of Thunderbird, you might want to look at Postbox. Postbox is actually a fork of Thunderbird, and it's a very, very good one, and I've paid for it, and I appreciate everything they've done with it, but they've removed a feature from Thunderbird that I absolutely love and depend upon and use several times per day, and that's a feature called Quick Filter. It's not a search, it's just a way to filter down. And it, if I'm in my inbox and I want to see everything that came from you, I could simply go to the Quick Filter box and type in Eric, and it instantly eliminates everything except what matches my filter. Nice. When I've communicated with them about this, they insist that their search feature is much better. But what they're not taking into account is that by searching, you're taking me away from the task at hand. You're forcing me to go do this other task, this other thing, to search, get results, and work with those results, versus just taking this list I already have and just filtering it down to show me only what I want. Look, they're not going to add it. They're not going to add it.
No, apparently not.
And they, as much as told me that, they're not going to add it. So in theory, it could be added as a plugin. Somebody could generate a plugin for it and add it to it. Nobody on the Thunderbird development team is going to do that. Why on earth would they want to drive people over to a competitor now.
Yeah. Right.
So yeah, and I'm not going to do it. I'm not a coder. So yeah, as long as this feature doesn't exist, I just can't use it. I mean, I really
No.
do depend upon this all the time. Now, the neat thing about Thunderbird is that they have really started putting some big effort into their user interface. That's been stagnant for years, and it's always been a criticism of Thunderbird that it's felt old. It didn't feel like it fit into what we think of as modern operating systems. And they have started to make a huge concerted effort to upgrade that interface. And they've taken some small baby steps. They're not quite there yet, but pretty soon they're going to be releasing what they consider their, well, not final, but near final version of what this future Thunderbird will look like. And I'm kind of excited for it because
Yeah.
the changes do make it feel much fresher and much more modern than it ever has in the past. On the other hand, I don't want them to change it so much that the functionality I'm used to is gone. And it's interesting about that because they are seemingly doing a very good job of balancing on that tightrope between long-term users and attracting new users who might
Yeah.
not otherwise, give it a
Look
look
at it.
because they're used to something simple and clean and what we consider modern looking, like what did you call it? What's the one you're using?
Spark. Or
Spark.
airmail.
You
Or,
know,
but
you
yeah.
know, yeah. They're much lighter looking interfaces. They feel lighter because there's nothing there.
Right.
And
Right.
yeah,
I should
even
check out
Apple Mail
Thunderbird.
to a certain extent. But they've really made some big strides in improving the interface on it, and more changes are coming.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to help them a lot. And they're bringing mobile clients to iOS and Android as well. So
Oh, that's nice.
they're
That'll be really
definitely
nice.
they're definitely a few years ago we thought it was going away. There just was no money, and there
Oof.
was no development effort being put into it, and they sure have changed their path on that. So I'm excited for the future because it's really a fantastic email client.
Y- Yeah, I'm gonna actually have to check it out. I tried it a really long time ago, and I did, but I think I'm not sure why I guess I probably was trying to, maybe at that time I was trying to find something that was more Mac native and whatever, and I don't know. But I do remember I liked it. I tried Postbox, and that was one of those things I really wanted to like, but it for whatever reason on my system it ran really slow, and I 2 different times and had the same results, and I emailed them and they gave me a refund. It was really nice, and like you said, I really wanted to like it because I thought it had some really nice features, and I would like to try Thunder. Right now, I'm kind of just in sort of I'm using Mail, not because I really want to, but because I feel like I have to, because Spark isn't really an option for me on on the Mac anyway.
Yeah,
And
Mail's gotten
if they
better.
came up with Thunderbird for, if they came up with Thunderbird for iOS, that would be terrific. Yeah, I
Yeah.
would definitely check it out.
Sounds like Android first, then iOS, but it'll be coming.
Okay.
Okay, so let's see. There was something else I was going to mention. Oh, the permissions thing. One quick note on that for all the Apple developers who are not listening to the show, because they don't. But the thing they could do, and this seems like it might be a simple solution for power users, is to have, like you said, some sort of button or link or something we can click within the first window that pops up and allow the
Right.
developer of the app to say, here are the permissions I want to ask for, and display them all within the single dialog box that pops up,
Right.
and to give
Right.
you the option within that box to turn on or off each of the options, and then click apply.
That would be, I would take that. I
that
would. Yep.
that would be
That would be
huge.
better.
That would be huge because
Yeah.
now we're
No, it
having to
would.
get pop, pop. They want this, they want that, they want this, they want that. And you're absolutely right. It's dialog box fatigue, and if you
It
recall,
is.
that was a huge problem with Windows Vista. And
Right.
what did
Right.
Microsoft do? They pulled back on the number of dialog boxes that popped up, thereby decreasing the security of Windows once again. By having all these
Right.
dialog boxes, they increased the security, but people stopped paying attention to them. And,
Right.
granted, if we don't accept these permission requests, if we don't turn these things on, the app just ain't going to work. It's just not going to work
Right.
the way we want it to. But
Right.
goodness gracious, yeah, there's got to be a better way to display all these at once so that we can decide. Now, maybe Apple feels that's too overwhelming, but I think if there's a way to just say, show me the simple interface, show me the complex interface, and
Right.
allow me to just do everything at once. Oh my gosh, that would be so much easier, especially with, like a remote desktop app. Splash Top SOS is a great example of that. And, these apps are doing a better and better job of displaying a dialog box and saying, here's step one, here's step two, here's step three.
Yes.
Do these in this order and everything will work. And Splashtop does a great job with their dialog box. But when you're working with a user on the other end that you are trying to offer remote support to, and you're offering remote support because they're having trouble with something on their Mac, and now they're presented with all these, system settings and dialog
Right.
boxes and privacy and security, and they got to turn this on and that on. It's a mess. There's just got
It
to be a
is.
better way. There's got to be a better way.
Right.
I agree.
No, that's exactly right.
So not a tweak, but an excellent point, and I hope that we see changes, especially in the permission dialog boxes coming in the future.
That would be really nice, actually. Even like you said, even what you just mentioned that third party developers could do, that would be terrific. I would take that. That would be
Yeah,
nice.
yeah. Back to getting our tweak on, Eric. I wanted to start with some Finder tweaks. I think if we're going to start anywhere, it's probably best to start there. And
The
while
Finder's the best
mine
place.
mine might be a little bit more classic, I suppose you could say. I've got a couple that I absolutely have to make whenever I set out to work on a new installation of macOS. So I thought I'd just kind of go through these Finder tweaks, and then maybe we can move on to, some dock tweaks, and then more importantly, some of the things we were talking about here, settings tweaks. But starting with the Finder, one of the first tweaks I make, and this is not for everyone, but one of the first tweaks I make is I go into Finder's settings or preferences, and under the General tab, I check the box for Show Hard Disks. Now, I know not everybody likes to do that, and Apple by default turns that off, but it does make getting to the content of your Mac's internal storage much easier. Alternatively, I suppose the way to do it is to simply click the Finder icon on the dock, and that works just as well too. But I am not in the habit of doing that. I am in the habit of looking for that internal storage drive, traditionally called Macintosh HD. Despite the fact they should change that to Macintosh SSD, shouldn't they? But Macintosh HD is the traditional name for it. I turn that on the dock, and gosh, if I need to get to the applications folder, if I need to get to another user folder or to the shared public folder, that's a nice quick way to get there by simply opening up that drive on my desktop. Now, I also do make sure that the other potential drive options are on, which I think a lot of them are on by default. But that is one of my personal preferences, is to make sure that Macintosh HD is turned on, or hard disks, show hard disks is turned on, especially if you have more than one, which I have had in the past, to have those on and showing on the desktop. Now, the other thing I do, and this might be more useful to folks as I go through these settings, is also under the General tab, new Finder window shows. So in other words, every time you open up a new Finder window, what does it show you? And I believe by default, I'm going to have to look at this real quick. I believe by default, it shows recents. I believe that's the default, but I always change mine to show my home folder. After all, if I am going to open up a new Finder window, the place I often want to be is where my documents are kept, where my downloads are, where my photos are. That's where I want to be. I don't want to be at the root of my Mac's hard drive necessarily. I don't want to be, I don't necessarily want to see all the recent files because that isn't necessarily what I want to work with. I may be seeking out something that already exists and has existed for a while, but not something I've recently worked on. So I change mine to always open a new Finder window with my home folder. Now, some of the other options that you can change that to include your Macintosh HD, your desktop, your documents, which would also be a good choice, iCloud Drive, if you keep everything in iCloud, which some folks do, and of course, recents. The other thing you can have it set to is, well, how do I describe this? Because the name for this one changes. I guess your Mac overall is what it would be. So in my case, when I click the drop down, it says Mike's MacBook Pro 13. Well, what that means is when I open up a new Finder window, it's going to, it's actually, here, let me open up a new window. Yeah, it's actually going to show your hard drive. It might show the network. It'll show other things that are available to you in this overarching umbrella of things that your Mac knows about. But to me, the most useful is to change it to my home folder. So that's one of the second tweaks I make while I'm noodling around in the Finder settings. The third change I make, and this is, I mentioned a moment ago, a little bit more classic tweaks. I'm a classic user. I've been using the Mac for a long time. So one of the more classic tweaks that I make is also on the General tab under Finder Settings. It's at the very bottom, and it's labeled Open Folders in Tabs instead of New Windows. And that, these days, is on by default. It's checked. And I will always uncheck that. I always prefer that when I open a new folder, that it not open in a tab. I prefer that it open in a new window. And that's why I uncheck that box. Now, if you did not know this, while you're in a Finder window, if you want to open a folder in a new tab or a new window, you can Command click it. So by holding down the Command key and double clicking a folder, that will open it in a new window. Okay. Next, while we're in the Finder settings, the other Finder settings change. I don't do anything with the tags setting. Don't mess with that at all. I typically don't use tags. I know Eric does use tabs. I don't. I know Eric does use tags. I don't use them myself, so I typically don't make any changes. No, you're back. You're back. I can hear your microphone, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like my face is gone.
Oh.
I use tabs too, by the way.
You do use tabs. Yeah. See, and that's what I was just saying. That's one of the more classic tweaks that I make is I use new windows. I prefer to open up folders in new windows. And to me, when they open up in tabs, my old addled brain just gets confused. So I always uncheck that box and I always open them in new windows.
That's awesome.
But you do use tags. I know you use tags, and it's something that I don't use, so it's not something I pay a whole lot of attention to. But while we're in there, it is you can actually drag and drop your favorite tags to this little box in the bottom of that settings window, and
Yeah.
they'll they'll appear there. They'll be more quickly accessible, I should say, in your Finder windows if you do that. So that would be a neat little tweak to make. It's not one that I make, but it's something
Yeah.
neat that you can do in there now, as well as turning on or off different tags. But
Right.
I
Right.
covered the while you stepped out, I covered the general tab of the Finder settings, and I, actually, Brian just has a really good point. I'll mention that in just a second. But I do jump to the sidebar, and by default,
Yeah.
Apple actually turns off a lot of these items in the sidebar, and I'm not quite sure why they do that. But I make sure that the following are always checked in my sidebar because these are things that I use fairly frequently, and that would be AirDrop, applications,
Yep.
desktop, documents, downloads, and my home folder. Those are the favorites I always want in there. I'm not so concerned about pictures. I'm not concerned about music or movies, or recents. I mentioned recents, as we talked about what new Finder windows show when you open them, but I'm not concerned about that. Uh, if I want to work with a recent file, it typically is in the recent menu of the app I'm working in. So I often don't even do that. And if I'm looking for something that I've worked on and I can't remember what it's called or everything that's in it, I'll use Spotlight and I'll find it that way. So I
Yeah.
I very
Yeah.
rarely use the recents feature of the Finder, quite frankly. But
I
those are the
Same
favorites I
here.
turn
I
on.
don't use them very much. Yeah. I don't use them a whole lot, but I do have movies and pictures and music. I do have those up in my sidebar. And I do like that. I also have the home folder showing up as well. Yeah, the sidebar is something I use fairly heavily. And you're right. I don't know why they have stuff turned off.
Yeah, I don't know how they have so. And I always turn on Mike's MacBook Pro, in this particular case, or Mike's Mac Studio, or whatever Mac I'm on. I always make sure that location is turned on. Make sure my hard disks and external disks, and yes, CDs and DVDs and iOS. I don't connect them much up to my Mac. Especially not
Right.
my portable Mac. I do from time to time
Yeah.
connect them to my desktop Mac, and I like to have them show up there on the side. I don't do anything with these others, cloud storage, Bonjour computers, and connected servers much anymore. I did used to use connected servers quite frequently. For anyone who has a NAS at home, you probably do use that fairly frequently.
Yeah.
But it is nice to have that listed in the sidebar as well when it's available. And that's the important thing with locations is it's typically only when available that they show up there.
Yeah. And also when you were talking about the drives and stuff, I do like that showing up on the desktop as well. All the drives, my hard disks, external disks, CDs, DVDs, whatever, even connected servers. And that stuff a lot of times isn't on by default either. You have to go and check that on. And I guess, I don't know if they're thinking for most people, they don't. But you know what? I'm probably and probably maybe this is you too. I go way back when that stuff showed up all
Yeah.
the time. And so I want it to show up. And
It feels
I want to
weird
see
for
it
it to
there.
not be there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And actually, one of the first Macs, that I really started using, basically was an LC2, but it was Performa, Mac Performa 405. And one of the things the Performas did back in the day that this was before the documents folder became a thing. And they had a documents folder that you'd stick all your documents in, and that would be, and it was set up on the desktop, and I think you could actually control that in the general control panel back then if you wanted to have that show there or not. And and so when I got a different Mac and it wasn't performing, and it didn't, I just kind of started doing that. I stopped doing that at a certain point, but it's just funny that what you get used to.
I know, and that was what I mentioned when you had stepped out. That I'm such a long time user that this is just one of those things I feel needs to be on, and that's Macintosh HD. And I mentioned, they probably
Yeah,
should rename it to Macintosh Storage or Macintosh SSD. But again,
right.
Apple likes to be a little a little sentimental from time to time. No matter what Steve Jobs said, there's a little sentimentality there in naming
Yeah,
it Macintosh HD, and I think it's going to be
HD.
called that for quite some time, or at least as long as they hide
And
it by default.
yeah, yeah, that's true. Actually, and too, the thing is, I've heard more than one person refer to SSDs or whatever as hard drives.
As hard drives.
It
Yeah.
and I've kind of felt personally like, what do you? Hard drive is just easier to say, and I find myself saying storage a lot more now, but
Me too.
it's just hard drive. People know what it is when you say, well, no, it's on the hard drive, even if it's not really a hard drive, and the problem is it could be, depending, but it's just like everybody understands that's like hard wired storage. It's the drive that's inside your computer, whether it's actually a moving platter or just a bunch of chips that are placed together. It just, I don't know, for some reason. Yeah.
Just like the save icon that represents that we know
Yes.
represents a floppy disk
Floppy.
doesn't mean you're saving
Right.
it to a floppy disk anymore.
No.
We understand when someone says disk, despite the fact there's no disk in that
In there.
drive anywhere at all
Right.
anymore. There's no disk. It's not necessarily a hard disk, although I guess it is a hard disk in that the chips are hard, right? That's how we
Right.
had a
Right.
hard drive versus a floppy drive. Is that you had
Yep.
the physically hard platters were inside a hard disk, and the floppy
Right.
mylar plastic platters were inside a floppy disk. That's where
Floppy
the
disk.
names
Yep.
came from. I mean, some people think it's because the 8 inch and the 5 1/4 inch and whatnot were floppy, but it's the disk
Yeah.
inside that was floppy, not the
Floppy.
external enclosing medium that was floppy. So yeah,
Floppy.
it's
Right.
just one of those things that, we can still say disk, we can still say hard drive. People know what we mean. But I have
Yeah.
found myself saying storage more and more. I mean, heck,
More and
even
more.
even
Yeah.
Apple has switched from calling these notebooks to laptops because it
I
just
know. I know.
made more sense to people that were
Yeah.
buying them.
Exactly. No, I know. D- Now when I just started calling them notebooks more, they switched it to laptop. Yeah.
Right? Exactly. Now we bounce back to the general tab, and I wanted to mention what Brian brought up just a moment ago because it's an important point. I do often, with the exception of this 13-inch MacBook Pro, I do typically work on either a 24-inch screen or a 27-inch screen, and I have a large display, and that's how I
Yeah.
prefer to work. And Brian very rightly pointed out that new windows are especially beneficial when you have enough screen real estate, which
Right. Right.
I always have. And so that's
Yeah.
no doubt why I always tweak that setting. I tweak it to open folders and tabs instead of new windows because I have that screen real estate to put all these windows. Now, I also, and we'll talk about this in a moment, but I also use mission control very heavily. And I think
Yeah.
that has a lot to do with it too. If I'm in the
Oh.
Finder and I want to see all the windows that are open, I can I can show all the windows that are open. Likewise,
Right.
in any given app I'm in, I can show all the windows that are open, or I can show all the windows that are open of from all the apps that are running on my Mac, thanks to Mission Control. So because I rely upon that very heavily, and I even copy and paste between Finder windows via Mission Control, I think that's also probably why I prefer it done that way. I actually find it more
You.
difficult to drag and drop from one tabbed Finder window to another tabbed Finder window,
Oh,
which I
really?
know is stupid.
Really?
It shouldn't be harder, but it's harder for me for some reason. I can't make it work when I want to make it work, but I can drag and drop from one Finder window to another when they're overlapping because I just hit the mission control key to show them all and I drag from one to the other. So
Okay, that makes sense.
that's just me.
Yeah,
But yeah,
but
that's a very
that's
good point. When you don't have enough screen real estate, and that is no doubt what Apple's thinking was, is as more people began purchasing MacBooks versus iMacs and Mac Pros and what have you, Mac Minis, more people are buying MacBooks than anything else. You have limited screen real estate, and when you have limited screen real estate, how do you deal with that? You put the Finder windows in tabs. Makes sense.
you know, I I see. I go the opposite, right? I put the Finder windows in tabs, and open things in new tabs. All the even if I do, I've got a 27-inch screen right here that I'm using. Even with that, and I think I just ended up getting used to that with the web browser and liking that. And I think the other thing that, and this is one of the reasons why I do like Safari, and I wish other browsers would do it, or they would have extensions that did it. And this is something that also Apple is stuck inside the Finder, and that is an overview. So if you have, let's say, a window with 10 tabs, you can hit a keystroke or hit the little. I'm trying to think what the command. It's not overview. Let's see. Oh, come on, for heaven's sakes. View. Now, of course, I cannot find it. Let's see. But there is a way. There is a way to show it where it. I think it's. It might
It's
be.
it's kind
It
of
shows all the.
it's a grid view of the open tabs.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
actually on my computer. It's Command Shift /, and it shows all the open tabs in the window, and then you can click in whatever tab, whatever one you want to, and it'll switch to that tab. It does that same thing in Safari. I think it's a different keystroke, but it's nice, and you can also open a new tab within it as well. So I find that I use that a lot, and I find that also in Safari I use that a lot, and so I can, even though Safari just lists all the tabs going straight across, like a lot of browsers do, I can go into that and just kind of do a flyover and see all the open tabs, and then know, okay, that's where that tab is, and find it. And the same thing with the Windows, and I use what you call it. You were talking about being able to copy things from one tab to another. I use that spring-loaded
Oh, sure.
folder thing
Yeah.
quite a bit.
Oh, yeah.
And so I use that with the tabs quite a bit too. And so I don't know. I've gotten used to that. The other thing too that actually comes with a small screen real estate is, for the most part, I have most of my windows open up into icons, but a lot of times what I'll do is I'll have them open up in list mode, and I got used to that when I used book, and actually I learned it from somebody else. Back when you'd have like 12-inch, 13-inch screens with the PowerBook, you didn't have all that screen real estate, and so to have something with these icons, sense to use the list, because you could see a lot more inside a window than you could with the icon mode. But then on top of that, I also get used to the list because it showed you so much more information. Plus, let's say you have a list of, you have a window open and it's got a ton of folders. Well, in list mode, you can actually open up all of those folders and drill down just holding a simple keystroke. I mean, if it has, let's say, 10 folders, and those folders have 5 folders in them each that also have, so you can hit, like, I think Command Option right arrow, and the thing will just open up all the folders, and you can see what's inside those. And not only that, but you can drag and drop files between those folders without ever actually leaving the window. So you don't have to, click into that folder and then go into that folder and then go into that folder and then go to see what's in there. You can just stay right at the top level and see all of that. And so that ended up becoming kind of a big power move for me, using a list. I don't, like I said, I tend to like the icon view by default,
Yeah.
but but list view is really powerful and can give you a lot of information if you need to do it, or you need to do some serious file copying.
I think we forget how incredibly powerful the Finder is, and
Yeah.
all these neat little tricks that we can do, like you're talking about dragging
Yeah.
and dropping from this hierarchy of folders in a Finder window. We forget about all
Yep.
these neat little tips and tricks that exist within the Finder until we sit down at a Windows computer and try to do something
Yeah.
and
Right.
realize that
That's
that functionality doesn't exist
it's
there.
not a,
It's like, good
right.
gracious. And then you read,
Yeah.
oh, Windows 13 is going to have this and this. And you're like, well, okay, wonderful. We've had that on the Mac since 2001.
Right.
And the
Right.
most, not to get too far off topic here, but the most recent was this week. There was an article about a great new feature that they're working on. It doesn't quite work yet. I found this amusing. I think I even put it in the news feed, and I was going to talk about it, but then I thought, nah, but I'm going to talk about it. So the great new feature coming to Windows 12, I think, maybe not, maybe Windows 11. I don't know. Some great new feature to be able to restore Windows, to effectively reinstall Windows without losing all of your content, without losing your apps, without losing your data, without losing all that. Just reinstalling Windows. It reinstalls Windows
Wow.
from the Microsoft Store, or the Windows Store, or whatever they call it. And I
Would that
thought,
be nice?
well, gosh, that's fantastic that feature will someday finally exist. And the article goes on to point out that, yeah, you can try it, but it doesn't really work right. Well, great. Fantastic. This is the exact same situation we've been in with Windows forever. So
Forever.
why not
Right.
introduce the new feature and have it not work from the outset? That's just great. But we've had this at least going back to 2001 with the
Yeah, at
debut
least.
of OS 10,
Yep.
and they're only just figuring this out now. I mean,
Now. Yeah.
come on, that's crazy. All right, I have one more Finder settings to cover that I like to turn on. We talked about the sidebar. There's one more thing about the sidebar I want to mention in just a moment, but under the Advanced tab of Finder settings, I don't really mess around so much with showing file name extensions and warnings
Yeah.
before changing an extension. That might even be a relatively recent. I don't remember that being an on-off switch before. But we always get a warning before changing an extension. I think that's a good warning. We should get those warnings because
Yeah.
if we
Right.
break that extension, we break the functionality of that file and or the app that opens that file. Show warning before removing from iCloud Drive. Cool. Show warning before emptying the trash. I leave that checked. I know I'm emptying the
Yeah, I do
trash. I
too.
don't need the warning, but
Yeah.
I leave that checked. I do not check remove items from the trash after 30 days.
No.
I'm victim of sometimes filing stuff in my trash, and and I don't want it to be automatically emptied. Here is one thing I do change though, and this took okay. I don't change keep folders on top. I know that's something from Windows. A lot of Windows switchers are annoyed that the folders aren't necessarily on top when they open up a Finder window. And for them, this feature exists. I don't turn that on. It didn't take me long to get used to the fact that everything's alphabetical and the folders aren't on top when I started
Right.
using the Mac full time way back when. So I don't mess with any of that. But the very last option under advanced is when performing a search. Okay. By default, I believe performing a search will search the entire Mac.
Mac. Yep.
And when I am in a Finder window, more often than not, when I'm performing a search, I want to know if that item is in that folder that I'm
Right.
currently viewing. Not
It's more like
if
a
it,
filter, a quick filter.
there you go. Not if it
Yeah.
exists elsewhere on the Mac, but if it exists
Yeah.
within that folder. So under advanced, I turn on or change when performing a search, search the current folder. After all, if I'm going to search the entire Mac, I'm going to use Spotlight. I'm going to hit Command Space
Right.
and I'm going to use Spotlight, and that's what I'm going to search with. So that's the last tweak I make to Finder settings. Now, there's a couple other tweaks, and you hinted at one just a moment ago. In a Finder window, under Favorites, you can reorder those. You can drag and drop and reorder the favorites in the sidebar of a Finder window. So what I typically do is I'll always put my home folder at the top, and then I'll follow that by the
Yep.
applications folder. And then after that, it's more just kind of an order by hierarchy. Like I'll put documents and Dropbox, desktop, and then the last two and least important are AirDrop and downloads. And it doesn't really matter to me which order those are in, but the most important are that home is at first, the first spot,
Yep.
applications, and documents. Those are the most important to me, and I always drag those up to the top of the list of favorites on the side. So that's a tweak that I make, and it's a tweak that a lot of folks don't realize you can do in a Finder window.
Yeah.
And then the thing that you hinted at is when you're in the Finder under the View menu. Well, one thing you can do is customize the toolbar, which is cool. If
Yeah.
there are buttons at the top of the toolbar that you just don't need, you can turn them on or off from Customize Toolbar. Cool. I don't usually mess with that. What I do, however, is go into Show View Options. And under Show View Options, this is where you talked about always opening up with a icon view, right? You
Yep.
can always open
Yep.
up Finder windows in an icon view. You can always, and this is a change I make, and I don't know why Apple doesn't do this by default, but you can change the files so that they sort by name. By default, they
Right.
just kind of blip. They're just there in the Finder window. There's no order. They're just, you can stack them on top of each other. I don't know why that is. Again, it's probably some sort of historical thing that Apple feels like that needs to be the default. But to me, it makes more sense to have the items within a Finder window sorted by name. So that's what I do. I change the sort by feature to name. I don't group them. Some folks like to group them. I don't use the group by feature, but I do sort by name. I leave the icon size at 64 by 64, and that's about it. I think I also turn show icon preview is usually on by default. I make sure that
Yeah.
that's on, and always open an icon view. I believe I turn that on too because I like icon view. And then once you make those changes, you click Use as Defaults at the bottom, and then that should become the default for new Finder windows that you open. This will not affect your desktop. Your desktop,
Right.
though technically part of the Finder, is managed separately. The view options for your desktop are managed separately. And that is more easily addressed by just clicking on the desktop and then going to the show view options, and then you can change it there too. And
Yeah.
I don't turn on sort by name on the desktop. I do turn on a grid view. What is it? It's show. Oh, sort by. Sort by. I don't sort by anything, but I do keep snap to grid on. That's what it's called, snap to grid. And
Yeah.
I turn on
Yep.
snap to grid on the desktop, and I don't use stacks. That's about it. That's about it. That's all I do in the Finder.
Yeah.
Is there anything else in the Finder that you tweak that maybe I didn't cover?
No, you covered it. I do use stacks. I like stacks a lot, but like you said, I snap to grid. I sort by kind in on the desktop. And within Windows, I do use the grouping a lot of times, and more I've been actually just sorting by date added or date changed,
Oh
modified
yeah,
or created.
yeah.
Just so when I go in there, especially if it's a Dropbox or some folder filled with a ton of stuff, right at the top, I see it. And or even if you're in a open save dialog box, it's right at the top. And so, but yeah, no, that's pretty similar. I use the same thing too with the search the current folder. Use that all the time. Although, for whatever reason, on my current Mac, it's not working. So I got to see what's going on there. You had talked about Explorer before as a not a finder replacement necessarily, but yeah, sort of file manager. And of course, Pathfinder's been around
Pathfinder.
forever.
Yeah.
And that does have some features, including like a filter where it can easily, quickly filter stuff that's inside a folder, and it works really slick. But again, like you said, you can't really replace the Finder. The Pathfinder will shut off, can quit the Finder, but then things just seem to get wonky. And
It does. It gets
so
wonky quickly, doesn't it? So
yeah,
it turns into an app that provides amazing functionality. Pathfinder is great, but it turns into an app
Yeah.
that really just runs on top of the Finder anyway. And
Finder.
that's kind of always been my issue with it. I like it. I like the functionality, but if I can't
Yeah.
outright replace the Finder, then it becomes, as you use the technical term, wonky. It just becomes too wonky,
Yeah.
and so I
does.
kind of stopped doing it. But I know a lot of folks who use Pathfinder and really enjoy it, and that's great.
Yeah.
And Explorer might be another great choice if you're looking for something open source. But for me, I'm very happy with the Finder and all the changes that Apple's been bringing to it.
Yeah, no, me too, completely. And I think they've really enhanced it. And some of the stuff that was kind of in Pathfinder a long time ago, the Apple since added to the Finder or added other stuff that has just really made it really slick. Even just renaming, if you have to rename a bunch of files, it's not. There's other apps out there that do this, like Better Renamer or whatever, that you can get really complicated. But at least with Apple, they give you a few options. If you need to rename a bunch of files, you have some options to actually make it work. It gives you like a list of, I think, 4 or 5 different replacement type things that makes it renaming files a lot easier and a lot more powerful than, what was there before, just in the stock Finder. So yeah, like you said, I'm a big Finder user, and there's times, there's like certain times I'm doing a certain thing, I might use Pathfinder, but otherwise I just stick with the Finder. It works for me.
Now, how about the dock, Eric? I know you put the dock in the wrong spot on your screen. I know that. But
Yeah.
what type of tweaks do you make to the dock when you set up a new Mac or create a new account on your Mac? That's another time where you might want to make these tweaks.
Right. Yeah. Well, I do, although now I must say I do have it in the right spot. I do have it in the bottom. But a lot of times I do move it. I did have it on the right or left side, which one of the reasons was because the way that the Mac screen is, it's wider than it is taller.
Right.
So I thought, well, I'll get more out of that screen space because I can use more for the Windows. And yeah, and because it is shorter, height wise, that, by getting the dock out of the way, and of course you got the menu bar at the top, that it would give more space for Windows and stuff. And I'm not one of these people that uses full screen apps a real lot, and I'm also not one of the people that likes to hide and show my dock or my menu bar. I like it showing permanently.
Yeah, me
but I
too.
do have it at the bottom now. But actually, usually the stuff that I do with the dock is I add a bunch of apps to it, make it smaller. I turn the magnification on a little, to make it, bigger. So when I go over it, and then also, I do add folders to the end of it. So I do have my downloads folder, which I think is there by default now, but also an applications folder, my applications folder that's listed in grid view, that I also show. So because I do like, being able to see that and quickly get at it. I do use Launchbar mostly for opening and accessing stuff, and I'm a pretty heavy Launchbar user, but I still like the dock a lot for just seeing, launching apps and seeing where they are, and getting quick access to folders or even links. You can stick a URL into the dock, shows up as a little globe, open up something. It's pretty slick. I think the dock is one of the great things about the Mac.
It's one of the great things about the Mac, and it's one of the things most often copied, yet never really
Yeah.
successfly. The,
Yeah.
the
Which
most
is
successful
funny.
dock copies I've seen have been on Linux, quite frankly. But Microsoft keeps trying over and over and over again to copy the dock, and I hate to keep picking on them, but gosh darn it, they make it so easy.
They do.
This Windows 11 taskbar is yet another, in my opinion, failed attempt to copy the dock.
Yeah. No,
That's
it is totally.
really what it is. I'm very much like you. I will open up my newly placed Macintosh HD icon on my desktop. I'll open that up, and the very first thing I'll do is I'll take that applications folder that's in there and I'll drag it to the right side of the dock.
Yep.
And
Yep.
now I say right side. Some folks don't notice this, but there's a little divider bar on the dock, and you can place things like you
Yep.
said. You can place URLs, website links, files, folders, what have you, between that divider bar and the trash. So I will always put the applications folder on the dock just to the right of that bar. And like you, I will set it up for grid view, and I will set it up to display as folder. I just think that looks a lot
Yep.
neater. And the other thing I'll do while I'm there tweaking it is I will change it to sort by name. So it sorts by name, display as folder, and in grid view, and that becomes effectively a little app launcher. And the neat
Yeah.
thing about setting up
Yep.
a folder that way on the dock is that you can drill down into it. So you can
Yeah.
drill down into utilities, you can drill down into any other folders that might be created in there. And it's just a neat way to access the applications that you have installed on your Mac. Now,
Really is.
while I'm down there, I'll also, from my handy dandy Macintosh HD Finder window that I have now open, go into my users folder and I'll find my home folder, and I'll do the same thing. I'll drag that
Yeah.
home folder down to
That's a
the
great idea.
dock, and I put
Yep.
that home folder next to the applications folder. And very much like the applications folder, I'll set it up in grid view, but instead of displaying it as a folder, I display it as a stack. And I think that's just for aesthetic reasons. It tells me that there's more in there than just the one folder.
Yeah.
So I set it up as a stack. It doesn't matter either way because the net result is the same. And then I'll
Yeah.
sort it by name. And the big benefit of that is that's a quick way to get to my home folder. No matter what's in my home folder, I can click that, and then, like with the applications folder or any other folder you put on the dock, you can drill down into it. And if ultimately
Yeah.
you want to open a Finder window, down at the very bottom of all these folders that you put on your dock, there's an Open in Finder icon,
Finder,
which is great.
which is
Which
really
is great.
slick.
So that's a good way to access it. And this is actually, I don't put Dropbox on my dock like I do my home folder or my applications folder, because Dropbox is within my home folder.
Right.
So when I want to get into Dropbox, I simply click that home folder, click Dropbox, and then drill down to where I need to be. So that's why I do that. Then, and by the way, as I mentioned earlier, while you're hovering over a folder so let's say you've clicked on the grid view of your home folder and you want to open a Finder window to, say, your pictures folder, you can command click it, and that'll open up a Finder window and take you there.
Yep.
So that's kind of cool.
They'll take you right there.
Take you right there.
Yep.
So that's kind of
Which
cool.
is slick.
I leave downloads down there, and downloads, I believe by default, is in the fan view, and I change it to grid view. And as you mentioned earlier, I change it to sort by date added, so the most recent download is at the top. So that's what I do
too.
with the dock. Now, the one thing I wanted to mention, you mentioned this too, is you turn magnification on, which I can't recall if that's on by default now or not.
Yeah,
I don't think it is.
Don't know. Yeah.
I don't think it is.
I don't think it is either. I don't usually set it to the highest magnification, just enough to bring it up a little bit. And sometimes I like making the dock a little bit smaller, so that's why I do have it on. But I could see definitely, like for other people, I think in my wife's case or my mom's case, I turned it off because I think it's one of those things that'll just screw them up. Like they'll go down there, the icon will pick up, and they're like, "What is it?" They don't need any more distraction sometimes. So it's
Well, the tip I wanted to share is that little divider bar that we were talking about. If you right click on that little divider bar, or I guess that would be control click, right? If you control click or right click on that little divider bar, from there you'll get a little menu where you can turn hiding on or off, you can turn magnification on or off, you can change the position on screen, you can change how it minimizes, which, goodness gracious, why would you have it anything but Genie? And you can also go directly to the dock settings. Now,
I have scale.
Which is cool. So you have to click in that spot, though. You can't click to the right of it because then you'll be modifying the folder that you have set there. You can't click to the left of it because then it's going to show you a menu for the app that you clicked on. It has to be on that little divider bar. But if you click there, you'll get these options to turn on these features, on or off these features. The other thing you can do, though, is if you hover over that divider bar, your cursor will change to an up-down arrow. And you can then click and hold and drag up or down to reduce or enlarge the size of the dock, which is great.
Which is totally cool.
You can do it right there on the dock by just clicking and holding on that little divider bar, and then you can reduce or enlarge the size of the dock. You know what? It's not super precise, but it works. If you want super precise, we'll get to that in just a moment. Oh, and then the last thing I do is, like you said too, I remove Launchpad, I remove Siri, I remove any Apple apps that I just don't use on a regular basis because they're now there in the applications folder I added to the dock. So I remove all those, and then, of course, I drag and drop the apps I use most frequently down there, which in my case would include, and I try to put them in an order. So from left to right, I have my browsers, I have my email clients, I have my contacts. I guess I could just look and see. My contacts, my calendar, notes, reminders, messages, and then I've got my writing apps, so Word and Pages and Scrivener, and then I have all the rest of the apps on my dock after that are there based on the usage of that particular Mac. So I try to keep all the icons the same over towards the left of the dock, but as I get more to the right, they become specific to that particular Mac. And that's how I do it. So yeah, that's about all the dock changes I make. And I think, Eric, that would bring us to settings tweaks. So
settings tweaks, yes.
In the past, we would have called this system preferences. And in the past, there would be completely different ways to get to these settings that we're going to talk about. But all the settings tweaks that I'm going to talk about today are going to be using the new settings functionality of macOS, Ventura, and when did that start? It wasn't Monterey, right?
Are you talking Mission Control?
No, settings. When did settings?
Settings. Settings was actually settings was Ventura. It was either Ventura or Big Sur. It was just recently.
It was very
I think it
recent,
was.
right? I'm not sure it was
I think
Big
it was.
Sur. I think it was Ventura.
I think it
Ventura and
was
Sonoma.
Ventura. I know it's before some. It was before Sonoma, but I'm pretty sure it was Ventura. Yeah. So yeah, when you talk about the distant past or the near distant past, that was the system preferences, and then if you're talking about the ancient past, that was control panel.
Control panel. Right, exactly. Well, anyway, my point is it's now well established that this is the way we're going to be moving forward. So as we talk
Right.
about these various settings, I'm going to be using the new settings feature of macOS to tell you where they are. If you're still using system preferences, a lot of these things can be found. Not all of them. There's a couple things that I tweak now that can't be found in the older system preferences, or even as old as Ventura, as ancient as Ventura. You can't find some of these
Ventura.
settings changes I make. But everything's going to be referring now to settings rather than saying this is where you find it in system preferences and this is where you find. So just keep that in mind. But you can always search in system preferences and you'll find it. So the first thing I do is would be under settings and then appearance. So appearance, how the Mac looks to me as I use it is very important. I like it to be consistent. And one of those consistencies, only because I find when I leave it at the default, it gets wonky. I
Yeah.
hate to keep pulling that technical term up, but it gets wonky when you leave it this way. So I go under appearance, and under show scroll bars, I change it to always. I have found that letting those scroll bars only appear when scrolling just gets too weird. Some apps just don't respect that, and so I just change it to always. Just always show me the scroll bars,
Wow.
and don't try hiding them because I don't
Don't do
like
it.
it. I don't like it.
I actually just use it to. Yeah, I leave it to automatic, which is odd. So that's interesting.
Yeah. So it may have something to do with the fact that I do use a lot of open source apps. I do use a lot of cross-platform apps, and it's probably in there that this wonkiness comes about. But that's a setting that I just
Oh.
find for me personally. I know this
Okay.
one is not for everybody, but for me personally, it works better to show scroll bars always. And that's it. That's the only change I make under appearance. I typically keep mine set to light mode. The primary reason for that is that dark mode, I really don't like the dark mode menu bar. I don't mind the dark mode dock.
Oh.
I don't mind the dark mode Finder windows or apps or anything, but the dark mode menu bar just doesn't work for me. It disappears for me when it's dark. And then there's the issue of not all apps having updated their icons to respect the dark mode menu bar. So you get this one weird app that's showing up in gray on it, and it just
Right.
it's like, okay,
Yes.
just let's just keep it in light mode. But
Right.
I do if an app offers the option to always run the app in dark mode, I will do that very frequently. But that, yeah, more and more apps seem to be changing it to respect the system setting versus allowing you to manually change it from one mode to another.
Oh,
So
that's interesting. So if
yeah.
if the app allows you to run it in dark mode 24/7, you do use that. But if it doesn't, if it's like changing with the system, then no, you don't.
I will often, yes, if an app allows me to change it to dark mode. Here's a good example of an app that does not work that way. It's a password keeping app called Strongbox. Strongbox is great. It's a nice alternative to 1Password. I still use both. It's something I started playing around with and have started using more and more, and actually have come to appreciate how it works. But the one issue I have with it is I always liked running 1Password in its dark mode. And
Okay.
Strongbox only goes into dark mode if your system is running in dark mode.
Oh, that's
And
interesting.
I sure would like it if they had an appearance option to change it to run in dark mode, because I personally find that Strongbox looks better in dark mode, and some apps just look better in dark mode, and
They
some
do.
look better in light mode. And so,
Yeah.
on the whole, I keep my Mac running in light mode. But that's me. And again, that's a preference thing. How about you? Do you make any changes to the appearance of your Mac other than the weird things I do?
Yeah. Generally, I do use the auto setting for dark mode. I do let
Mm-hmm.
it go, around sunset. I do have it switched to dark mode, and I do often like the dark mode setting on most apps than I do light mode. But I still keep it that way. I think it's easier to see it in light mode, especially during the day. I do like how in dark mode though at night it's dimmer. I was trying to think if, as far as the rest of it, I do use the scroll bars. I do set it to automatically. I do set it to jump to the spot that's clicked. Um, Sidebar icon size, I set it medium. The one thing with the accent color, I tend to switch that based on the time of the year. So right
Oh,
now we're in red for
interesting.
Christmas, and otherwise, it's like green for summer, blue for winter, that sort of stuff.
Do you automate that, or do you do it manually?
I do it manually.
Okay,
I should automate that. That would be kind of cool. But
that's cool.
yeah, I just do it. I never understand that accent color where they've essentially got the rainbow. Is that
Yeah.
supposed to be like the sort of the app's choice or something? Because it doesn't seem to. It just makes everything blue anyway.
Well,
Normally.
I don't know. Quite frankly, that's what I have mine set to, and I don't know. It just seems to be normal to me.
Yeah, it doesn't really seem to do anything.
So yeah, yeah, it's just blue. I don't know. I
Yeah,
don't know what that does. It's blue.
it's blue.
It's not rainbow.
Yeah.
It's blue.
It's blue.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's what I mean. It's not rainbow. And so then I'm like, okay. And I don't know. Let's see. I think in Word, like in Office, it's like a darker blue. That's why I started thinking, like, is it like,
But that's
you know,
Microsoft. Microsoft allows you to
yeah,
change the themes, and I think that's their theme.
that's their thing. Okay.
I think that's
I
theirs.
couldn't
Yeah.
tell if it was,
Yeah. They have some neat
yeah.
themes
So
in Office, I have to admit. Yeah.
they do actually. No, that is for sure.
Yeah.
No, they totally do.
I'm going to skip over accessibility for a second because there are some accessibility changes I make, but I'm going to skip over that for a second and go straight to Control Center. For those of you watching the video, you can tell I'm actually looking at my settings while I'm talking to you, just to remind me of what I changed. But
Changed.
under Control Center, this is where you can, and I like this feature. I have to admit, I like this feature because it's a
I did
lot
too.
easier to manage what shows up in your menu bar than it's ever been in the past.
Yeah.
And the thing is, as I mentioned earlier, I'm kind of a classic old school user, so these settings changes
Yeah.
are my personal preference. But the important thing to know here is that by coming into Control Center and in the Control Center module section at the top, you have the ability to turn on or off some of these menu bar items right there. Right there. You can just turn them on or off.
Yeah.
And I love that feature. So I have mine set to show Wi Fi, to show Bluetooth, and to show sound.
Yep.
I don't
Yep.
show AirDrop. I don't show Stage Manager. I don't show Now Playing. In fact, I really dislike the Now Playing, and I wish that could just disappear entirely. I don't need that. I don't want it. And yet, every stupid Apple device I have shows Now Playing on it when I know something's playing. I don't need that
Don't
widget
do it.
showing or what.
Can't you say don't show in menu bar?
No, it's always there. If you go into the control center of, no, you can say don't show a menu bar, but if you go into the control center of your phone, Now Playing is there. I want it gone.
Oh,
I
yeah.
want it. I want it gone from the control center of
You don't want it.
my. I don't want it at all. I just want it gone. I want to turn it off entirely, but you can't turn it off entirely. Okay, rant
That's awesome.
aside. Now Playing needs to die. No, Now Playing I turn off in the menu bar. Now the
Yeah.
the other thing is, show when active. So this is kind of cool. You can show when active,
Yes, I like that.
and I make sure to show when active, focus, and screen mirroring for sure, and then also display. I have that show when active as well.
Yep, I
Now,
do too.
as you go down through here, there are some other important ones that you might want to turn on or off, and these fall into the other module section. Now, this one I'm actually going to literally read out of settings because I don't mess with these too much, but I do make sure to turn on battery. I show that in the menu bar. I also show it in Control Center, and I show the percentage. I like to see the percentage of my battery, so I make sure I turn that on also. And then fast user switching. I do have multiple accounts on my Macs. This is not something that's applicable to everyone. And I've always shown fast user switching in my menu bar. One, it's a great quick way to sign out of your Mac. At least to lock your Mac. It's a great way to lock your Mac is to go in there and lock things up by clicking on that icon. So I would always show it in the menu bar. But now I tend to turn it off in the menu bar just to save space and show it in Control Center. The only thing about showing it in Control Center, and again, this is really how intermittently I use it. The only thing about it is I just don't like how it appears in Control Center. It's just this tiny little icon off to the side, and it looks unbalanced. So I sound very Johnny Ivy when I say that, but the way it appears in the Control Center, just I don't like it. So I tend to just out of habit turn it on in the menu bar and turn it off in Control Center. But what do I know? And then
Yeah.
and then finally under menu bar only, I turn on Spotlight. I turn on Time Machine. I like a nice quick way to get to Time Machine to see what's happening with it. And I turn
Yep.
off
Yep.
Siri. Now everything's going to go off in my office, but quite frankly, I don't use it. So I turn that off.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then the last thing I do is under clock options. And there's all kinds of really cool clock options in there that you can turn on or
Yeah.
off. You can make it digital, you can make it analog. And I always thought analog was a bit weird, but you can make it digital or analog. You can show the date. You can show the date when space allows. You can show the day of the week, which are both settings that I use. When space allows, show the date, show the day of the week. I think that's cool. Show AM, PM. I have that on. If you're, in Europe and use 24-hour time or military 24-hour time, cool. You don't need that. But the one thing I turn on and make sure I turn on every single time is flash the time separators. Now,
Yeah.
that seems silly, right? Why do I need to see the seconds ticking away up in the clock in the top right of my screen? There's one very good reason for it, and I depend upon this. If my Mac appears to be locked up, I look
Yeah.
for those time separators.
Yeah.
If the time separators are flashing, my Mac is not completely locked up.
Locked up.
It's
Yeah.
still running, it's still active. If those time separators stop, then I'm like, well, time to press and hold power. And that's really the main reason I turn that on. I turn on
Which
flash
is
time
smart,
separators
actually.
as a little tool just to let me know if the Mac is completely locked up. And this happens very rarely, by the way. If it's completely locked
Yeah.
up, or is something just happening to take all the resources away from it and make it appear as if it's locked up?
Yeah.
And that's why I turn that on. So that is just another tip, more so than a tweak. It's just a little tool to let you know what's happening.
Yeah, and that's actually a smart move. That's brilliant. I don't know why. Yeah, I now have that turned on to mine too as well. Of course, I have the seconds turned on too, so I do see
Oh,
the seconds.
yeah.
ticking
See,
away,
I don't show the seconds, so that would be
which
where that would be beneficial. Then, yeah. So that's the same
Yeah.
thing. If you have the seconds on, you don't need the flash the time separators. You just watch the seconds tick by.
I have mine set up a little bit differently because I use I use iStat menus, and so I use their
Ah,
calendar,
yep.
and I use BusyCal's. It was before that FantasticCal's little date calendar icon that shows you the day, and I think I think this one just shows the 29. Like it just shows it doesn't show anything else, but it's got like a little blue and white with the black 29 on it, so it shows you the day, and then the it shows Friday and then the time on there, and it. I like the iStat menus stuff, and so also for that same reason, I don't show the battery. I have iStat menus show the battery in the case of for the laptop or the
Hmm.
MacBook, and then for sound, I use let's see, it's a Rogue Amoeba. Rogue
Oh yeah.
Amoeba's sound source, and their sound source is excellent. So I use that in place of the sound. So what I do for the clock thing is I end up using the analog clock because you can't turn that off. There's no way
Right.
you can do so. In order to make that little and as how do you say, as take up as
Innocuous.
little space as
Yeah.
possible. Yeah, innocuous. Yeah, I just turn on the analog version of it, and so then I use the iStat for everything
You
else.
have just
But otherwise,
presented
it's pretty much the same
you have just presented the best case I've ever heard for the analog
for
clock.
using the analog. Yeah, I often wondered if that's why they had it because it's not useful for anything else.
It's so
It's too
tiny.
small.
How do you
It's so
see the
tiny.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
Yeah. So that's pretty good. I
Yeah,
don't know if there are any other control center changes that you make, but those are the primary ones that I make.
those are pretty much the same thing with me too. A lot of stuff I have show and active, Stage Manager, Spotlight, Siri don't show in menu bar. Time Machine do show in menu bar. Wi-Fi, Bluetooth show in menu bar. Just because I'm used to always seeing that. The AirDrop thing, I wish they had like a show and act. I guess maybe it'd be too hard to do that. Focus, I have show and active. But otherwise, yeah, it's I do use the show and active quite a bit for things, just because it's nice to know. It's nice to know. Screen mirroring, display, and that sort of thing. So I do use actually I do have the now playing set to show and active. I should probably change that.
Now, I'm going to skip over Siri and Spotlight only because I personally don't use Siri on the Mac, but it is a great place to come in here and change the keyboard
Yeah, I don't either.
shortcut for it. It's interesting that Command Space is the keyboard shortcut. Now, the difference is you hold it down. I use Command Space for Spotlight, and so to think of Command Space as being the keyboard shortcut for Siri just seems weird to me. Although I do realize that you hold it down versus simply, momentarily pressing it. But you can change that. So you can change the keyboard shortcut for it. You can change the language. More importantly, you can change the voice. A lot of folks like some of the different voices that are available for our favorite
Yeah,
Apple knowledge friend. I don't
S
know.
lady.
I'm
Yeah,
trying to avoid saying the name because every time I do, my stuff is going off here. Now, the other thing
yeah,
is the reason I'm skipping over Siri and Spotlight is because the Spotlight system preferences used to be much more functional than they are now. In the past, you could do what you can do now. You can turn on or off different search results. So, for example, you could turn on or off calculator,
right,
contacts, conversion, etc. There's a
right.
whole list of things that you can turn on or off. But in the past, you used to be able to reorder them. You used to be able to drag and drop them into the order that you wanted the results to be returned. And so I would always return, documents and folders and things like that. I would always put that at the top. But
Yeah,
now the search results are, well, they just appear in this alphabetically, really. And so when you're getting search results, you almost always end up getting applications first, which is great because I do use Spotlight as an app launcher. But then you might get other results before you get Finder results. And that I find a little disappointing that Apple took that feature away. And that was really the only
Yeah,
tweak I would ever make to Spotlight is I would just change the order of the results.
I
But
know.
since you can't do that, I'm going to skip
I
past
don't know
that.
why they did that. Yeah,
Privacy and security,
it's
I'm
too
going to
bad.
skip past for now as well. But I'm going to go to desktop and dock. And at the very top of this is some of the settings that we talked about earlier, where you can right click that divider bar and get to just about all of these settings that you want to, including the position on screen, how you want it to minimize the windows, whether you want it to automatically hide and show. All that kind of stuff
Yep.
is right there under the dock settings in your Mac system settings. I am, however, going to jump forward to desktop and stage manager. Now, this is going to be a little controversial. I've tried Stage Manager and I just don't get it. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I don't get it. I can't understand how hiding everything off to the side makes me more efficient than when I can see everything that I need on screen and I can easily switch to what I need by using what we already had, which is mission control.
Especially in especially in the Mac.
Yeah.
There's really just not the need for it on the Mac. The iPad, since it's really the only way that you can do multitasking, it makes sense. I've gotten used to it. I like it. It's fine. I don't on the Mac. It's more hampering. I did turn it on for my mom. I don't know if it totally helps her or not, but I was kind of thinking it might be useful for somebody that isn't completely aware of how multitasking this program's running and gets this out of the way. And I think it does help her some, but yeah, for me, it's just not. It's less efficient
Yeah.
than more. So yeah, I think if you already know what you're doing and you already have a system down and all that stuff, Stage Manager is not going to be, you know, it's not going to be worth it.
Oh, I know. It's not worth it. So here, here is, we saw Brian's
Yeah,
comment there just a moment ago.
that's
I
Brian.
haven't
I
interact.
totally agree with that. Actually, I
Brian wrote,
haven't.
I haven't interacted with anyone who enjoys Stage Manager. Yeah, well,
Yeah, neither have I.
it's a big club, Brian. So
Yeah,
I make the following tweaks under settings and desktop and dock, go down to desktop and stage manager, and really, I changed this new setting in Sonoma. Click wallpaper to reveal desktop. No, no, I don't want to click wallpaper to reveal desktop. So I changed that to only in Stage Manager. And that's great because then under the Stage Manager section, I turn that off. And then I turn Stage Manager off, I mean. In other words, there's a setting there called Stage Manager, and I just slide it to off. Show items on desktop. I don't show items in Stage Manager. That's the default. And then the rest of it doesn't matter. None of the rest of it matters. Show recent apps in Stage Manager. That can be on or off. It doesn't matter because Stage Manager is off. And then show
right.
windows from an application all at once. Doesn't matter because Stage
Yeah,
Manager is off. Now, that is not as draconian as it sounds because if I ever decide I want to turn it on, I can just use the control center. There's an option in there to turn it on or off Stage Manager. Or I can use the keyboard shortcut that I created. In my case is F3, and I'm going to get to that in just a moment. Now, lastly, while I am in here, and specifically under desktop and dock, uh, and these are all personal preferences, of course. Under
right.
widgets, I well, I actually set this to show widgets in Stage Manager only. Again, I don't have a whole lot of use for widgets. I have enough junk on my desktop as it is. I don't need widgets cluttering up the space too. I had this brilliant idea.
I do like widgets.
I had this brilliant idea that if I told it to show widgets only in Stage Manager, that I might be able to recreate our old friend. I might be able to
Oh,
just invoke the Stage Manager
yeah.
key and only show widgets when I'm in Stage Manager. But alas, it doesn't work. It does not work the way that I expected
Why?
it to.
Oh, because it
So
just, yeah.
yeah. Anyway, so basically, I turn off widgets on desktop and in Stage Manager. It didn't work the way I wanted it to, and that's
Hmm.
it. So then I changed my default web browser. I changed it to Firefox. That's my preferred browser. I do in my dock, as I mentioned earlier, keep Opera and Safari there handy. Each of those has its own purpose.
Yeah.
And then, one more change in here. I turn on ask to keep changes when closing documents. I am not a fan of the Mac or any operating system automatically saving what I've been working on unless I want it to save. So I make sure to turn on ask to keep changes when closing documents so that I'm more in control over what gets saved and what doesn't get saved when I'm working on a document.
I'm the opposite.
Yeah, see?
I just wanted to keep the changes, and so I just don't even. Which it, yeah, I could totally see your way too.
Well, I keep a lot of information for people in separate pages documents, and sometimes I just want to see what's in those documents. And when I open it, even if I type a space and say, "Oh, I didn't mean to type a space," and I backspace over it,
Yeah.
the date changes, everything changes on the document. I lose track of when the document was originally created. I just no,
Yep.
no, don't save any of those changes. So I turn it off. I don't want those changes saved.
Makes sense.
Even if I'm manually undoing the changes, I don't want it to update the document based on some errant keystroke I made. So that's
Yep.
really my reasoning for doing it. But I do understand the security and safety of having it automatically save, but that has ruined more documents for me than it's actually helped.
Well,
So
yeah, definitely in that case, yeah.
yeah,
No,
there
I
you go.
definitely get that.
That's
I
it.
should
That's
maybe
all the
rethink that.
changes I make under desktop and dock, other than what we mentioned earlier about the dock changes. I just kind of glossed over those, but because this repeats what you can do by interacting with the dock directly. Do you make any other changes to how this stuff works?
No, I like you. I do not use Stage Manager, obviously, and I do use doc magnification. I do make it fairly small, and I usually use it. A lot of times I have it on the left, like I said, I had it on the bottom now. Minimize. I do use the scale effect minimizing. One of the big things I do like to do though is double clicking the Windows title bar for zooming. I do
Oh,
like the zoom function, and I miss that in the Finder. The Finder and the classic Mac used to have a really good zoom button, and it would just basically show you. It would make the window big enough to show you everything that was in that window, and that kind of went. And most applications did that very well. OS 10 came out, it kind of messed. The green button didn't really do a good job of that. And you can do that with using the green button now, except for you have to hold down the Option key.
right.
So I like the double click the title bar. I think on Windows, if you double click the title bar, it maximizes the window. And so in this case, I really like the fact that that it does do that. It does basically does a zoom. I think in the classic Mac too, they used to have like something called window shades where you could double click the title bar and it basically would roll it up so you just saw the
They
title bar.
they did.
Do you
They
remember
did.
that?
Yeah,
It was
that was
hilarious.
awesome.
That was actually kind of a neat way of window management too.
You
But now with Mission Control, you don't need it.
you're touching on one of the big complaints that people have when they switch from Windows to Mac, and that is clicking the zoom button before full screen. Before full screen,
Yeah.
clicking the zoom button would not necessarily fill the screen.
Right.
It would make it as large as the Mac thought the window should be to accommodate the content that's within the window,
Yep.
versus just fill the full screen, for goodness sakes.
Right.
That's
Right.
what Windows users are used to, and that's what they
What they
miss when they
expect.
click that button.
Yeah.
Now, I am very used to option clicking that button to zoom. I kind of wish there was a setting where I could flip flop the functionality of that button
Y- yes.
and make
Yes.
full screen
Because very
option
rarely,
click. Yeah.
yes, I almost wish they would just do that because very rarely do I want to full screen an app.
Yeah.
It does happen, but it's not often. And yes, I wish I could. So the way I've gotten around that is I just double click the title bar to zoom. I just stopped doing the option click to zoom because I mean, I could still do it, but it just, it was, I don't know, it was sort of a pain. Like you said, I wish they were flipped around. So the roll up feature takes me back. It does.
Yeah.
I know. that
I'm glad
cracks
you
me
brought
up.
that up, Eric, because I am completely the opposite. I really get annoyed when I double click someone's title bar and it zooms the window because
You like it minimizing or
I change mine to minimize. So I double click, I forgot to mention that. I double click a Windows title bar to minimize. That's what I set mine to.
interesting?
And yeah, that I hardly ever. I can't think of time. I always double click the title bar. Never click that yellow button. I need to get used to clicking the yellow button though, because
Yellow
more
button.
and more apps don't have a title bar.
Yeah.
Have you noticed
right.
that? The
That's
title
right.
bar is
Yep.
disappearing, even on
It's gone.
Apple's own apps. The
Apps.
title bar is going away. And you have to find
Yeah.
that one little tiny spot in the title bar to double click and either zoom or minimize. And
Yep.
yeah, that's but that I set mine to minimize. But I appreciate zoom. I just really dislike it when it happens to me. Yeah. So that's that. Now, the rest of this is all, of course, personal preference. You've got displays and wallpaper and screensavers, battery. There's not a whole lot you can do in battery, quite frankly. That you can go in there and you can see what your battery's health is, which I'm always a little suspect of how accurate that is. Low
Yeah.
power mode. There are a couple options for things like whether you want to display the to dim when you are on battery. I do typically turn on. I don't consider this a must-do tweak, but I do turn on prevent automatic sleeping on power adapter when the display is off. I do always turn that on. I know my Mac will sleep. Actually, it doesn't. That's a whole nother issue. But I know my MacBook will
Yeah.
sleep
No, mine doesn't either.
when I am running on battery.
Right.
But that's actually a problem that came up with Sonoma. My MacBook no longer sleeps running on battery when I close the lid. It just continues running and drains the battery in record time.
Oh.
But I believe it's an app I'm running because I can log out and sleep,
And then it
will sleep. And
sleeps.
even though in Activity Monitor there's an option to show which apps are preventing sleep, that has been completely unhelpful. So I don't know what it is. I don't know. There's something I'm running, and I'm starting to suspect Dropbox, honestly. But something I'm running is causing it to not sleep when I close the lid, even on battery. But regardless of that, that is a setting I turn on. And then there's Power Nap and Wake for Network Access. Both of those I set to only on power adapter. We don't want the battery draining unnecessarily just because it's checking for iCloud updates or what have you. And that's it. So there really isn't a whole lot in battery. There's not a whole lot under lock screen that isn't very personal to how you use the Mac. Likewise, Touch ID and password, users and groups, passwords, internet accounts, Game Center, wallet. Now we get to the important stuff. And the final things I wanted to talk about. I don't know how many other things you want to talk about, but the final things I wanted to talk about are the inputs we use to communicate human to machine. And that is the keyboard and mouse and
Right.
trackpad. Those are the final tweaks I make to
Yep.
any Mac to make it feel more like my
Yep.
Mac. And the first one, and this is where the biggest changes have come about from system preferences to settings. But the first change I make, and this really kind of goes back to, well, it goes back forever, but more specifically when this touch bar came along on the MacBook, which I know
Yeah.
they don't have
Yep.
anymore. But
Yeah.
the touch bar and then the what do they call them? The special function keys. You know,
Yeah. Right.
gosh, I can't think of what they call them. You know, brightness and volume and all that.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. I know what you mean, though. Yeah.
Brian will tell
Yeah.
us.
It's the, yeah.
Anyway,
I think it is sort of like the special function keys or something. Yeah.
so this
Something
particular
that's,
yeah, this particular setting is something that I started turning on years and years ago because I end up using the function keys more so than I use the special function keys. And the way you turn this on has changed considerably from the system preferences days. And that is I set the F1, F2, etc. as standard function keys.
as your default.
Yep. And
Right.
Apple actually moved this. It's under settings and keyboard. And then you have to go to keyboard shortcuts.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you have to go to function keys. And that's where you can turn it on. So in under, Brian says, I'm not sure either. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, we're all on the same page. But it's under keyboard shortcuts, function keys. Then you can turn on use F1, F2, etc. keys as standard function keys. And you know, the thing is, you can always get those special function keys back by just pressing and holding FN on your keyboard. That's all you have to do.
Right.
So if you want to adjust
Right. And
volume,
it's the same way the other way, too.
it's the same way the other
Yeah.
way. But for me, I use the function
Yep.
keys more than anything else. And the reason that became more important with the touch bar is because the escape key disappeared unless you did that. So
Yeah.
you know, once that escape key disappeared, I use escape all the time. Heck, I named my
Oh, yeah.
business after it. And
Yeah.
by not having it there, that really hindered my workflow. So I had to make sure that the use standard function keys was turned on. And it's just something I turn on all the time. But it's buried. It's in a completely different spot than it's ever been before. Now,
Right.
while we're in here, while we're in this new section that's called keyboard shortcuts, this is where most of the other tweaks that I make to the keyboard are done. And the next one would be under mission control. So mission control under keyboard shortcuts, this is where I turn on or change application windows to F10, show desktop to F11, and turn stage manager on or off with F3. That's where I turn those on. And that gives me a way to still play around with stage manager without running into it constantly. If I put
Right.
it under a function key that I rarely use, I know it's there. I know I can press that key. I know I can get to stage manager if I want to play with it, but it's out of the way. But the two keys I use the most are show desktop. I use show desktop all the freaking time. And you would think I would love the click wallpaper to show desktop, but I don't. I like to be able to have a little bit more control over it and not accidentally show desktop because I happen to click on the wallpaper. Application windows, F10. Again, a lot of these go back to the original mission control keystrokes. That's where these go back to.
Yeah.
And then
Yep.
F9, of course, is mission control itself. So mission control, show app windows is F10, show desktop is F11, and F12 used to be dashboard. And I would always show dashboard with F12. But since the most important app I ever used in dashboard was the calculator, I got pcalc and I set its keyboard shortcut to F12. So
Yeah. That's what I've got, too.
so
Yep.
now F12 still gets me my calculator, which is exactly what I want.
In fact, actually, I I did that in F12, and I'm like, oh, it brings up pcalc, and I forgot that I set it up to do that. Actually, I set it up in keyboard. If I hit F12, it brings up pcalc. If I hit F12 again, pcalc goes away.
Yes.
It
Yep.
just
That's how I have it
like
too. Yep.
starts and stops.
It's
Yeah,
very much like
and
dashboard,
yeah,
and yeah, F12 just brings
yep,
pcalc to the fore and hides it again when I don't need it, and
yep,
it's perfect. That's exactly what I need. And it was really, I kid, but I don't kid. The calculator I used on dashboard all the time, and it was
yeah,
such a habit to F12. And the neat thing was dashboard would remember the last widget that you interacted with. So I would hit F12, I would have my calculator, hit F12 again, it's gone. And so now I get that same functionality with pcalc and the F12 key.
yep, yep,
Now
which is
here's
great.
here's one that's buried in what we talked about earlier. This is also under keyboard shortcuts, and it's under services. And under services, there's all kinds of neat little services that you can enable related to development and files and folders and internet
Yeah,
and messaging and pictures and searching, etc. But the one I really like to use and I find very handy is under the text setting under services. And if you open up or click the little disclosure triangle and reveal what's under text, way down at the bottom there in alphabetical order is summarize. And
yep,
Summarize is such a cool feature that's just native to every Mac for I don't know how long. You can you can copy and paste any amount of text from anywhere into, well, let's say a text edit document. That's a great place to do it. Select that text
right.
and choose Summarize from the Services menu, and it will allow you to create a summary of that text in either sentence form or paragraph form or what have you. And it really does. I mean, talk about AI. This has been around for ages,
It has. It's been around for a
pre
long time.
AI days, and it
Yeah.
just does such a wonderful job of summarizing the text that I use it fairly frequently. So that's another tweak that I turn on. I guess that's probably more a tip than a tweak, but you do have to go under services, text, and then check the box for summarize in order to turn that on. It's not on by default. So that's everything I do for the keyboard. How about you? Do you make any other changes to the keyboard functionality on your Mac?
No, not that I can think of. I use the special function over the function keys. No, actually, that's pretty much the same for me as well.
It, it, all right, now here's another reason I turn on my scroll bars all the time is because at the moment I was in settings and I wanted to click in settings and get to the next section that I wanted to talk about, but I didn't want to accidentally jump down that scroll bar. So I click the active part of the scroll bar. I can see it. So I can click it and it doesn't cause it to scroll anywhere else. It just allows me to just stay right where I was.
You okay? Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
As a little side note, that won't be in the final show. See, Brian gets to hear that stuff that doesn't make the final cut of the show, and that's my little reasoning there. All right, so the
Yep.
next and really, oh gosh, no, it's not the final. I have one more settings tweak that I'm going to make after we talk about this, but it's under the mouse and trackpad. Okay, and again, controversial mic here, but one of the very first things I do is turn off natural scrolling. I I I I can do it. I can sit down at somebody else's Mac. I'm like, oh, okay, they got natural scrolling turned on, and I get used to it. It's fine. But to me, in my brain, on a Mac screen, not an iPad screen, but on a Mac screen, if I want to go down, I should scroll down. If I want to go up, I should scroll up. And natural scrolling is the opposite of how I feel it should be. So thank goodness Apple gives me the option to do that. But did you notice that Windows now has natural scrolling too? I don't know what they
Oh,
call
does
it,
it?
but it's on by default on Windows computers. So they have
Interesting.
copied Apple once again on that. Now, Secondary click, I turn on. Secondary click, I
Yeah.
turn on with a Magic Mouse. Click on right side. Now, if you have a Logitech or you have some other brand mouse with physical buttons, you don't need to do this. But with a Magic Mouse, I turn on click on right side. I literally just last week read an article from someone, once again, criticizing the Magic Mouse because they say it only has one button.
They've
Well,
actually never used it.
technically,
And
yes, I suppose it only has one physical button in it, one physical clicker inside of it, but they've never really used the Magic Mouse. They haven't
no.
looked at these settings. They haven't realized that you can simply turn on, click right side. And the benefit, of course, is if you're left handed, you can change it to click left side. And
Right.
that gives
Right.
you it's probably one of the most ambidextrous mice I've used because of this
Yeah.
setting, this ability to change the setting. So click on right side is all you have to do, other than put your finger on the right side of the mouse and click. That's all you have to do to get a secondary click, to get a second mouse button, if you want to be pedestrian about it.
Right.
A,
Secondary mouse button.
a
Yeah, that's what.
secondary
Yeah.
mouse button is just turn on, click right side. Again, we've mentioned this before, why Apple does not have this on by default in 2023. I don't know, but again, history. This is how the Mac has been. This is how the Mac was, and I just think that they feel like it should just be single click unless you
Well,
absolutely want to turn it on.
and the thing of it is, it's a simpler thing, and I think that's probably what they tend to go for. Whatever's easier. And there was a whole big debate. I mean, when the Mac first came
Mm,
out, it was one button on purpose. It wasn't one button because, well, that's all they came up with, or whatever.
no,
And for the longest time, you didn't need more than that, and it worked just fine. And Jobs and company wanted the one button, and in fact, I think at the time, the Xerox
it had three,
whatever.
didn't it?
It had actually, depending upon, it had up to seven in some cases. It had a lot of buttons, and
It
that
was a
was
gaming
something they were
mouse.
trying to, yeah, they were trying to get away from. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so, I think I think it's a great solution. I kind of wished I liked mice better. I just don't. So
Yeah.
I use a trackpad, but I think the Magic Mouse is perfect.
I think the
I really
original
do.
hand carved wooden mouse, the very first mouse created, didn't I think that had three momentary switch buttons on it. They were like red momentary switches, if I recall.
Engelbart,
Yeah,
Engelbart's
and
mouse.
it,
Yeah, I
it
think
was
you're right.
interesting because there was a company in the 80s, Genius. The Genius mice were very popular at the time, and they had three buttons, and you could program that middle button to do different things for you. This is obviously before scroll wheels and whatnot, but
Yeah,
yeah, one
yeah.
of the first mice I ever had was a Genius mouse, and it had three buttons.
I
Yeah,
bet. I bet it did. It probably was very. Yeah,
which in a way,
makes sense.
while we're in here, which in a way the Magic Mouse has quite a few buttons on it, if you will, simply based on how you set it up. If you want to smart zoom, you double tap it
Smart too.
with one finger. You turn that on, you double tap the mouse, you can smart zoom. Under more
Yep.
gestures, these are not necessarily things I have turned on. Some of them I do. Swipe between pages, you can turn that on. You can scroll left or right with one
Yep.
finger or two fingers, so these are what are often replaced by with buttons on mice like the Logitech mice, or where you have to
Right.
hold a modifier key while clicking a button or scrolling a wheel. These are things that are just
Exactly.
native to the Magic Mouse. Double tapping with two fingers to get mission control, swiping between full screen applications, left or right with two fingers. These are all things that
Right.
are native features of the mouse, and they're, no pun intended, very natural movements to
Yeah.
do. And I appreciate all those. I just don't appreciate natural scrolling. Ha ha ha. Trackpad, very much the same. If you have a Mac with a trackpad or you have a Magic trackpad, you'll have these options. In fact, you have more options than you have with the Magic Mouse. But I always turn on tap to click versus pressing down on it. I turn on
Clicking.
tap to
Yep.
click. And then
Yep.
secondary click is click or tap with two fingers. Those are the main things that I
Yep.
turn on with a trackpad.
Yep. Same with me. Yep. All the same.
Now, how
And
about you,
the only
Mr.
other thing I
Trackpad?
would add,
I know you have the track ball. You like the track ball.
I do like the trackball, but yeah, I've been using the trackpad since Apple came out with it. And with that, I do use a three-finger drag. That's probably the only big thing that's different. They used to, what did they have? They had something different. I don't remember, but I think they got rid of it, or maybe it was the tap and drag. Anyway, so I ended up, or they maybe once they came up with the three-finger drag as an accessibility option, and I thought I'd give it a shot, and I just got hooked on it. It was like it just became a really easy way to move things around. You just three fingers on the trackpad, you can move stuff around, and so it forces you to set your mission control gestures a little bit differently. Like with four fingers and that sort of stuff. But it works great, and you know, one of the many reasons why I like the trackpad.
You know,
I just
there's
like
one
it.
other setting. You just hinted at this, and maybe it's what you were trying to think of. But there's one other setting I turn off. And the reason I turn it off is because I like to click and drag with the trackpad. And to do that, I'll use my thumb to click and hold. Let's say I'm clicking and dragging an icon on the desktop or a file from one window to another. I'll click and hold with my thumb, and then while I'm holding that click down with my thumb, I'll use my index finger to move the item. And that works well.
Yeah, yep, yep.
But that only worked well until Apple created a feature called force click and haptic feedback. And
Oh, yeah,
once they added that force click and haptic feedback, I could no longer click and hold with my thumb because it would initiate these haptic feedback features like quick looking, a dictionary definition, or whatever it did.
yeah,
And so I turn off, under trackpad settings, I turn off force click and haptic feedback because that got in the way of my ability to drag and drop, or click and drag, I should say, in general, with the trackpad.
yeah.
Yeah.
Something that something that you, yeah. I do like the force click, and I do actually use the double tap to zoom, but I do like the force click and the what you call it, the haptic feedback, or the, yeah, I guess it is a force click, and I do
Yeah.
use that actually with the trackpad. And I'm sure you can do with the Magic Mouse if you're like using the QuickTime application to fast forward or rewind back. The harder you push into the trackpad, the faster it goes. The more you let up, the slower it goes when you are fast forwarding or rewinding. And I kind of wish they did that more often in applications, but that's pretty slick.
And one last mouse tip from Brian. The horizontal scroll is great too. Oh, God, oh my gosh, absolutely. When I sit down at a computer that does not have a Magic Mouse and I can't horizontal scroll without, well, it's usually a Windows computer, and it's usually something like holding down, I don't know, the control or option key along with scrolling up and down. It just makes no sense to
Yeah.
me. The fact that I can just swipe my finger right and left on the Magic Mouse and horizontally scroll right or left all the time I use that. And if that ever went away, I'd be very, very sad. Very, very
Yeah.
sad. And trackpad, of course, that works with the trackpad too, but I use that on the mouse
Yep.
all the time. One of the biggest advantages of not having a physical wheel on that mouse. I think we talked about that with the Mighty Mouse and the scroll ball. That was
Yeah.
fun. Okay, I promise this is the end. I have one last set of tweaks that I make. and it falls under accessibility. Now, before I get to those, I know you brought a number of tweaks to the table, Eric. What have we missed? What in your bag of tweaks have we missed that you like to make to every new Mac or every new account you make in a Mac when you sit down at it?
Actually, I don't think we're missing anything. I've kind of slipped them in there, when we were going over the others. So, um, yeah, I don't think I've thought of anything that you having already covered.
Or that we
You've been
haven't
pretty
already
thorough.
covered? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you might think you know what I'm going to mention under accessibility, and there are lots of tweaks under accessibility that we can make. But this one is very particular to how I use the Mac. With Ventura, so this is under settings and accessibility, and then under display. With Ventura, Apple decided that in Finder windows, I believe it was Ventura, it might have been before that, they decided within Finder windows that it was not a good idea to display window title icons. And I disagree. I vehemently
Yeah.
disagree with that. The window title icons are fantastic because if you have two Finder windows, or let's say you have a Finder window open and it's open to a specific location, and you also, at the same time, have a file open dialog box that's popped up, or file save. Let's use file save. You have a file save dialog box that's popped up, and they remember the last place you saved, right? And so now you got to go through this file save dialog box and dig around and find the folder where you want to save it. But it just so happens that the folder that you want to save it in is that open Finder window off to the right. And oh, by the way, the folder within that window that you want to save it in is there. You can see it. So you can click and drag that folder from the Finder window into the save dialog box, and it'll pop right over to that location. That's great.
Right. Right.
However, you could also drag and drop the window title icon. If you wanted to save into that Finder window, but not a subfolder of it, you could take the window title icon and drag it into the save dialog box. Boom. And the save dialog
Right.
box would jump over
Yep.
there. Same thing with open dialog boxes and what have you. You can do that, which is great.
Yep.
Well, when they turned off the window title icon, you could still do it, but it involved a little trickery. You had to kind of like get the mouse in the right spot and hold it there, and then it would eventually appear, and then you could click and drag it. But if you didn't click and drag it right, then you'd have to do it again. It wasn't as elegant as it was in the past. Well, fortunately, under accessibility and display, there is now an option to turn on window title icons. So, to give myself that old classic Finder window title icon feel, I just go into settings, accessibility, display, and turn on show window title icons. So that's the first tweak I make. And I love that Apple put that tweak in there. That's fantastic because I do use that feature a lot.
I do too.
The other thing I do in here, I mentioned earlier, I'm not a big fan of the dark menu bar. Well, even when you are in light mode now, depending on the wallpaper that you have set, the menu
Right.
bar
It changes colors. Yeah.
might change
It
colors.
could get dark.
It might get
Yeah.
dark. It like it's not random. It's based on the colors from the wallpaper that you've selected, but it changes from the light menu bar that I like to the dark menu bar to like some weird transparent menu bar with all kinds of strange colors in it from the wallpaper behind it.
Yep. Yep.
I don't like that. So I go under accessibility and display and I turn on reduce transparency. When you turn on reduce transparency, that functionality of the menu bar goes away. It just becomes a solid menu bar. So I do kind of like the slight transparency to the menu bar. I like the slight transparency to the dock. And granted, that both goes away. They become solid. The dock becomes solid and the menu bar becomes solid. But other than that, it stops the menu bar from changing based on the wallpaper that you have set behind it. And
Right.
I've come across all kinds of, apps in the App Store and open source apps and all kinds of stuff that purports to stop it from doing that. And the way they do it is they inject a solid line behind the menu bar. That's typically how I've seen it work. They inject a solid line behind it to fool it into always being the one
Right.
color. But then it kind of messes with your wallpaper and all that stuff. So by just turning on reduced transparency, I've been able
It
to
fixes that.
circumvent that issue. It does give it kind of that classic look. You no longer have that somewhat elegant, transparent feel to the dock and to the menu bar, but it does get around that problem, and that's the other change and the final change that I wanted to mention today. Eric's just shaking his head.
Very well. If I was going to say very well that if people don't have something to do after all that, then there's nothing we can do.
We
That-
have
I mean-
thrown as many tweaks and tips at people as we possibly can, way more than we even
Exactly.
should. And certainly something in here must be useful to someone.
Exactly.
The only
Exactly.
downfall might be that they have to listen to it all to get to that special something.
No, that's the good part of it. It's it's the listening to all of it.
Oh, well,
awesome.
then, Eric, I think that's going to do it for our well, I was gonna try to come up with a clever way of saying our once every 5 year tweaks episode, but I think that's gonna bring this tweaks episode to a
That to be
close.
it.
If there are any tweaks that you think would be unique and different, or things that you like to do to your Mac when you set it up for the first time, be sure to leave your favorites in the comments of this week's show notes, and you can find that at formaccguysonly.com. Remember, I do love to get your letters, so if you have any comments about the show, a tip to share, a software or hardware problem with your Mac, or as I said, some tweaks that you like to make when you're setting up a new Mac, be sure to leave your favorites in the comments of the show notes, or drop me a line. Even better, drop me a line, Mike at formaccguysonly.com. Be sure to subscribe to the show's YouTube channel at youtube.com/FMEOTV. Click that little notification bell and you will find out when we're going live. You can join the chat room and you can catch all the behind the scenes stuff that doesn't make the final cut of the show. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. Thanks to Eric for joining me for our Tweaks episode and our final episode of 2023.
Wow. Yeah. No kidding. I didn't think about that. And what episode number is this?
422.
Wow. Wow. 422.
I'm waiting for him to say glad to be here.
Glad to be here. So- the 422 just threw me. I didn't know, but
Thanks to Eric for joining me this episode. Stay subscribed.
glad to be here.
Stay subscribed.
Cue the music. Sorry, now I just go ahead.
Oh, goodness gracious. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. Thanks to Eric for joining me this episode.
Glad to be here.
I'm going to have to cut this all together into a new
Oh, yeah.
outro.
Yeah. Right.
Stay subscribed. We'll talk to you next time.
Cue
I
the
won't cue the
music.
music yet. I want Brian to hear this. Thanks for hanging out, Brian. I really appreciate it. Have a fantastic New Year
Yes.
weekend. I really enjoyed having you in the chat room. Yeah. Oh, you're welcome. He said, "Awesome show, guys. Thanks for the amazing tips." Hopefully something in there helped. But yeah, thank you for hanging out there with us today. That was a lot of fun. I appreciate
Yeah.
it. Once
No,
we
it
cue
totally
the
was great.
music, you can't hear us anymore. So I wanted to say all that first. So I appreciate
He's probably
it.
thinking, yes, cue the music.
Cue the music. Goodness gracious. Goodness gracious. Stop talking. I need to go home. Thanks.
Yeah,
Brian.
Happy New Year, Brian.
Happy New Year. We'll talk to you soon. Now cue the music.
Now cue the music. Cue
All
the
right.
music.
Cueing music.